Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Wow. As the clock chimes and it's 6 o'clock, we will commence this evening's show. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to members of the public, visiting councillors, friends, members of the panel and officers. Good to see you all. There are no emergencies hopefully going to happen this evening. If there are, though, and if you do hear an alarm, please evacuate via the main staircase or the alternative smaller staircase, whichever is appropriate, and head down to the car park in St Drummold Street. This meeting is being broadcast over the internet, as always, live, and it'll be available on Catch Up as well, so you can all watch back and scrutinise yourself and us. Discreet use of mobile phones is okay, but please try and be in the moment and enjoy the meeting. If your phone goes off, there will be a fine, and that will go to the Mayor's charity. And it's not Christmas anymore, so the fine is in my gift. I am Councillor Darius Laws. I am a councillor for Rural North Division at the City of Colchester. I'm the chairman of this panel tonight. I will go around the table and ask you all to introduce yourselves. So starting over there on the left, in the purple, the Roman colour of royalty, I believe. Over to you.
Tracy Arnold, Stanway Ward, thank you.
Councillor Sam McCarthy representing Shrub End.
Councillor Jocelyn Law representing Highwoods.
Sam McLean, Newtown and Christchurch.
William Sunnox, Rural North, and I'm substituting for Councillor Tom Rowe.
Dennis Willets, Lexton and Braeswick Ward.
Richard Block, Chief Operating Officer.
Owen Howell, Democratic Services Officer.
Martin Goss, I'm the portfolio holder for Neighbourhoods and Waste this evening.
I'm Rosa Tanfield, I'm the Head of Neighbourhood Services.
And John Callett, Business Improvement Manager for Neighbourhoods.
David King, Leader of the Council.
Chris Harve, Deputy Section 151 Officer.
Councillor Mark Corey, Resources Portfolio Holder and representative of Wivenhoe.
Thank you, everyone. So we have two substitutes this evening. Councillor Jocelyn Law here for Councillor Faye Smalls and Councillor William Sunnox here for Councillor Thomas Rowe. Welcome. I hope you have a lovely evening. Okay, item 3, urgent items. There are none to report. Item 4, declarations of interest. Would any councillors like to declare an interest? I see none. We move on to item 5, minutes. We have 2 sets of minutes to approve because there was some slight tweakage on the 14th of November minutes, but I'm satisfied with all of that. Is everyone else satisfied with the minutes they've seen?
Agreed.
Agreed. It seems unanimous. Great. Okay, item 6, general have your say. We have a visiting councillor and we have a member of the public. I think we'll afford the member of the public the right to come up first of all. Alan Short, you have 3 minutes to have your say, and then I will say something, and then you can have another minute if you'd like. But make sure you please hit the button so that everyone in the room and at home can hear what it is you have to say. Okay, when you hit the button, it's in your hands.
Okay, my name's Alan Short and I live in Central Colchester, and I wish to raise an issue with the committee, which I believe needs to be investigated, potentially because it places the council at risk of legal action. It concerns the agreement in June 2022 of the local plan, which included Middlewick Ranges. I do not believe that the councillors had the necessary and up-to-date information at that meeting to make a decision, because information from one of the statutory bodies in the UK commenting on that comments were not circulated to the councillors before the meeting. You can get the letter itself, it's from Natural England. I've got a summary here of some of the things they said. Natural England emphasises the importance of considering the full ecological impact of development of the Middlewick Ranges and the necessity of upholding statutory biodiversity duties. They imply, this is my words, they imply that the council must thoroughly assess and prioritise the site's ecologically significance in decision making. The letter also points out that the site is of considerable importance for diversity and abundant invertebrate fauna, including rare and notable species. It underscores the site's ecological value, which may not have been fully recognised earlier. Natural England then goes on to note the significance of the challenge of securing in development consent in Middlewick Ranges due to its ecological value. This implies that any proposed development would face considerable scrutiny and potential opposition meaning from Natural England. They then stress the need for a most up-to-date and complete ecological data to be considered. This previous data being incomplete or outdated. That letter was withheld from councillors who, when they made their decision, of which only 26 voted in favour of the plan, did not have that information to consider. They might have made exactly the same decision, but the fact that they didn't have the information from a statutory body, in my view, could be considered as a breach in the law by the council, and that any councillor who decided that he made the decision on inadequate information that the council had withheld could probably take them to law. Here at the end of the lesson.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Shaw. I'm familiar with the letter you mentioned. I'm not a full-time member of the local plan. I've been a substitute member before, and so I'm vaguely familiar. But as a gesture of goodwill, if it's appropriate, I will check in with the monitoring officer to see if what you say could be something that would be a problem. Is that satisfactory from this?
That's satisfactory, providing you let me know what they say.
Okay.
I mean, it is a serious breach. The council had the letter. They didn't circulate it to the councillors. They had plenty of time to do so, and it was a very important letter. As I said, the council may have decided to take the same decision, but not having this, it calls into question the whole process, and that's something I believe the Scrutiny Committee falls within their terms of reference. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you,
I'm going to ask the monitoring officer to give us that clarity. If we've got your contact details, which I assume we may well have, I will get the monitoring officer to pass those directly to you. So I'm putting it on record now that that is my request to happen, so we can get that clarity for you. All right. Okay, next up, I'm going to call visiting Councillor Tim Young, who wishes to speak under the general have your say item.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, Scrutiny panel. This story is broken today, and I think it's very serious, and I think it's important that Colchester City Council deals with it, and probably Scrutiny is the best place to deal with it. It's about bailiff referrals rising by 20% over council debts, a story broken by the BBC. And I think we all know that the BBC is very unbiased in its reporting, despite what some people might be saying lately. Unpaid council debts risen by nearly 20%, and the actions taken by some of the bailiffs are, in this BBC investigation, looking to be, well, it says one bailiff said he was incentivized to use underhand tactics. One of the bailiffs, and this has been publicly reported, so I'm not putting myself in any litigious danger, I don't think, is Jacobs. And I know this council uses Jacobs as bailiffs, and I've had constituents complain to me about the actions of Jacobs acting on behalf of the City Council and had to get council officers to remedy it. So I just wanted to raise it as it's broken today. It's a very serious story. You can read all about it later, but I think this council would want to look at it very seriously and in the very near future to make sure that we're doing everything right, and that when we use bailiffs, we use them at the very, as a last resort in very serious circumstances, and we certainly wouldn't want to use bailiffs who are using underhand tactics or dodgy practices. So I just wanted to raise that with you tonight because I think it is very serious, and I want the City Council to be have clean hands on this.
Thanks, Councillor Young. You've broke that to me, but I am familiar with how some bailiffs operate generally, and I have had personal experience where I've moved address and someone's turned up at my door because I didn't know that my other half had driven through a bus lane, and the debt was close to £500. And if I hadn't settled part of it there and then, they had a warrant and they could have stepped into my house there and then, which frankly annoyed me that happened over the post not arriving for various reasons. So I do understand. I'm going to get familiar with what you've just said. I'm not sure it's a work item matter, but it's certainly great that you brought it to everyone's attention here. And I know that the leader is here listening and the chief executive, and we'll all, I think the word you used was clean. That was nice. Thankfully, we don't have too much bad debt in this authority, as I understand it. But for those that do find themselves in difficult circumstances, the last thing they want is to be facing incentivised debt collection as you describe. But I will look into it personally, and I'm sure we all will. Thank you for bringing it to our attention. Okay, that concludes the guest speakers this evening under General Have Your Say. We will move on to item 7, decisions taken under special urgency provisions. There are none such that I am aware of. Item 8, cabinet or portfolio holder decisions called in for review. There are none that I am aware of. Item 9, items requested by members of this panel and other members. There are none new ones. And just to mix it up, we're now going to jump to item 13, the work programme, to effectively get that out of the way, as it was described to me earlier, in the most friendly way possible. So Owen, work programme, item 13. We've got a busy session coming up, and there is still obviously lots of things that this panel would like to look at. But just give us a brief précis of where we're at with the forthcoming meetings and the things we're expecting to be talking about.
Thank you, Chair. I'm unused as I am to speaking so far up the agenda. I'll give it my best shot. Yes, as you say, our February and March meetings both have very hefty agendas in terms of amounts of items and also the amount of content for a lot of those items. We've had a further request, as we've discussed before this meeting, from Mandy Jones, Strategic Director, relating to asset strategy. Now, as you'll see, we were due in February to be considering an item on the Council's approach and policy towards the use of owned community assets and where and when it's appropriate to charge for that use. That was then flagged up as actually something that would be more appropriate to consider in the terms of the full asset strategy, which was being worked on by officers and brought to a point at which it's available for scrutiny. Today it was informed by Mandy that they would like that to come to the February meeting, as it's now in a far enough advanced draft stage to be considered before it goes to Cabinet for approval, which is scheduled for the March Cabinet meeting. Now, firstly, I need to ask the panel if the panel is happy to have that added to the work programme on principle, and then secondly, we need the panel to have a look at scheduling and where members feel it would be appropriate to have that if they would like that to come before the panel before it goes to Cabinet for decision. So I'll leave that for the panel to consider and discuss, and happy to take any questions on that and take any views.
Yeah, okay, I'm going to look around the room. I mean, the February meeting has got a lot on that agenda. What would the room like to do? Because obviously if it's to happen before March Cabinet, it would have to be then, or we would have to have an additional meeting squeezed in, probably not necessarily that easy, or just have a very lean discussion on all those items and have a late night on February the 13th, the day before Valentine's Day. What is the feeling?
Sorry, could you list what those items are?
Sure. Portfolio holder briefing for leisure, culture and heritage. Corporate key objectives in the performance indicator targets for 24-25. Arts organisations receiving council funding. Potentially an interim report on the Middle Mill Weir. And it was my idea to say that we should have an urgent interim report because the more substantial work might not be ready by then. Fit for the future programme discussion. So there's quite a lot going on there. We could have a late night. Councillor Willits is my deputy. What are your views?
I think, Chairman, that the item might fit neatly in that we have the portfolio holder for leisure, culture and heritage with us, given that this particular item came about from when the council decided it would charge an astronomical fee for the Colne Valley Youth Orchestra to play in the bandstand, plus whatever it was, £10 per chair for each member of the youth orchestra to sit on, which was felt was as an iniquitous charging of what was a charity event. The matter was then swept under the carpet in that I think the leader stepped in smartly and gave a grant to the charity that was organising the event, so that they were then in a position to pay amphoras ridiculously high fees. The specific issue that prompted this, I think, has been dealt with, but it leaves behind a trail that at a time when we are leveraging as much as we can get out of our assets, we do have to be cautious that from time to time there are youngsters who we want to encourage to play their instruments in public or play, do stage performances in public in Castle Park, and we should not be charging them the full going rate, not even the charity rate, because that's iniquitous compared with the funds at their disposal. So I was suggesting that we should have a report on this and just see whether, in our opinion, Cabinet has the right balance in terms of garnering in the funds to pay for public services, but at the same time making sure that we have a light touch where there are things that we want to happen, where we want our young folks to excel in the arts in public, and we don't want to inhibit them. And there may be other examples of where there is a social policy which we think should perhaps take greater precedence in regard to the amphora charging regime. Thank you.
That makes sense to me. So I think we are going to do it on February meeting, but in the context, Clark, we're going to be focusing on what Councillor Blitz has just said there, which is that the primary concern was around young people still in education, providing music and having the opportunity to use a council asset to play and perform music in a municipal environment, and we don't want to be charging people for that. So that was where motivation came from. So I accept we can do it on that night, and it will be a later evening, but that's no problem. We've still got Valentine's Day the next day to look forward to. Okay. Sorry.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I could just get a show of hands from the panel to confirm happy with that, I'll make that a unanimous vote in favour. Thank you.
Thank you. It does make sense before the March Cabinet meeting ultimately. So, okay, that's a work programme. Thank you. Okay, well, we now have the excitement of introducing the portfolio holder for Economy Transformation Performance, Councillor Mark Corey.
That's not my title. I'm portfolio holder for resources. So
yeah, I did see that.
Unless the agenda's slightly wrong.
It's my crib sheet has let me down there, but that's my bad. Don't worry. Okay. Portfolio holder for resources, Councillor Corey. You may speak to the panel about the work that you've been undertaking on behalf of this fine city, and we always like a bit of future gazing as well. And so, touch into the future if you like.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, and good evening all. The leader will know I'll do any job with any title, so I'll try and cover as much as I can. I'll do a short start, and then you can ask me questions. We can see where the discussion goes, but also we've got the budget item later, where I'm sure there'll be more in-depth questioning.
And are we able to keep you for this evening for that item?
Yes.
Great.
Yeah. Yep, I'll be missing dinner at the George with some friends. But the earlier we get away, the better for our local economy and me spending in it. I'll try and sort of recap some of the year, but for one sort of task, we've been bedding in some new and excellent finance members, one being Chris here and the other being Andrew, taking that full strategic and important Section 151 officer role, having Chris here as the sort of in charge of the whole finance team, and Andrew strategically with the Section 151 officer role. Having both of them come over from Epping and being shared with Epping, I think is novel and has really been a coup for us, to be honest. So that's been fantastic working with them. The style that Chris has brought has been really transparent and open, and has been working through, looking at some of the ways we've done it. Local finance is a maze, local government finance is a maze as it is, and then how different councils do it again is then a further step. So I do think, thanks to Chris and Andrew, we have started to present our papers in a bit of a better way, and just to organise some of our ways in which we do our transactions and accounts in a better way. So I thank Chris and the team for that. And I suppose getting through this budget setting timeline has been difficult because of understanding where local government finance is. There are councils across the country that are facing so many challenges that they are going to the point of announcing technical bankruptcy as we'd understand it. We are not there. We are prudent. We have been working on balanced budgets as close as possible over the years. We have had reserves there to support, and we have reserves in place as we have prudently managed them over the years. And we are looking very closely at the revenue, which we'll talk later in the budget, and cutting down spending, cutting down cost, increasing income, increasing investments to save money as well. So we have been absolutely knee deep in the budget process for months now, running up to last Tuesday, sort of final bits being finished off. And apology, there was a day delay on that, getting the cabinet papers and the scrutiny papers, but that was partly because we were absolutely pushing up to the line, being as open as we could. We had a leaders alumni session before that, where we were trying to be as open as possible to get in as many views on the budget before papers were published. That does not mean it is absolutely fixed. We are still going to listen tonight to what Scrutiny have to say, other members at Cabinet, and then full council itself. And I want to thank David as well as leader for ensuring that open process has happened, even beyond just the members' briefings with those leaders alumni as well, and bringing in other members at different points throughout the year, whether it be on revenue or capital expenditure. So that's the budget really. Just a couple of items. We have gone through a capital review where we did a workshop, which again involved wider membership, not just myself and David and those responsible in the cabinet. And that has been really useful, and that has set in train the strategy going towards a corporate landlord team. So a corporate landlord strategy, looking at our assets in a much better way, a much clearer, transparent way, but in a much more agile way. And that process has begun, the building of the corporate management team, corporate landlord team, sorry, and bringing in a fantastic asset in the person being Patricia Barry. She's got fantastic expertise. I think everyone cross-party has been impressed with her so far, and really leading from the front on that asset work. And we've got a lot more to come. There'll be papers coming forward about business cases, about investment to improve some of our assets, to look at business cases about disposing of some of those assets, different types of investment models, etc. So there'll be more to come on that. Then we have, in terms of revenue, the Fit for Purpose, Fit for the Future programme. So that Fit for the Future programme has been presented through the budget papers. It'll be presented in greater detail at the upcoming briefing, how that will be delivered and the HR implications. But we are clear as Cabinet that that needs to be delivered in order to meet the budget and the medium-term financial forecast that we've put in. That is a transformation program that we've been working on for almost a year now. People have heard about this transformation program. We've talked about it in larger level detail, and it's now coming down to that more granular stuff. How many FTE, full-time equivalent people, may we lose? How are we going to change the setup of the organisation? That's a considerable amount of work we as Cabinet have been working on, and again are trying to socialise that amongst members as much as possible, with the members briefing we had before Christmas, the members survey, and further work over the next month or so where we want further input from members. Just a few other bits. The local council tax support scheme going through a fundamental change as of this year, going to a banded scheme. That means there'll be much more simplified administration, both for the resident and for the council. I see this as a real mutual win-win for resident and for council. And we'll have a sort of transformation year where no one will lose out, and hopefully most people will either gain or be about the same, and essentially they will get hopefully one bill for the year, one or two bills, rather than the changes that happen due to the differences in universal credit or other benefits they get. So that's a positive. One other positive I will end on is being able to go to Rowan House and enjoying the fantastic facility that that now presents for our staff, but also for us as members as well, for the joint working and partnership working that goes on, the increased rental income we get from other usage of that site, and us being Colchester City Council being in a smaller part of the building. But it's a fantastic venue now for staff to go, and something that they deserved, an investment in our staff. I could talk about the pay rise also being an investment in our staff, but I think that could fall out of the budget conversations or any other questions. I'll leave it there, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Corey. I'm just going to look briefly around the room and see if there's any pertinent questions. I know we'll have a lot of very interesting questions during the budget discussion, but is there anything specifically for Councillor Corey right at this moment? I see none. Okay, well, I'll jump in first actually, and just give you a platform which is to acknowledge that it must be frustrating that we don't have audited accounts, and that is not the fault of anyone in this room, is it? But it must be very frustrating.
Absolutely. We have talked about this at Governance and Audit quite a bit, and I always give a clear perspective from my point of view. So we have worked to make sure our end of the accounts are as up to date as possible. We've been working on timelines. We're keeping members updated as to us closing our accounts. Chris can talk more about that and the staffing of it and the requirements, making sure it's absolutely cut and dry and correct. Chris is quite a perfectionist and wants to make sure it's right, as do we. But the market in terms of the partners that we use, so the private businesses that we have to go out to and get to do our accounts are way behind. It's the same across the public sector, so the NHS was suffering in the same way. They have had a focus upon their audits, so that has slowed down local government even further. So we're still waiting. Chris, are you able to say when we're, in terms of accounts, one internally and two externally, when we're expecting the timeline of our accounts going as far back as needs be?
Okay, thank you. So first of all, Colchester's accounts then, the 22-23 accounts are getting very close to publication now. We've established a tentative, I would use the word tentative until they're actually published, tentative reserves position on the balance sheet, and which was a major breakthrough, if you like. I never realised how much I relied on those accounts until I didn't have them, but so that's a step forward. We're getting very close there. We previously published the 21-22 accounts in September. With regards to the audits, that is the 2021 audit is in progress, and to be fair, the external auditors are active at the moment on that, so that's a good sign. There was such a long period when they weren't active, so they're active on that. We are awaiting communication on the latest developments, but I believe there was circular from the minister that went out in the last few days, which has indicated a backstop date of the 30th of September for signing off 22-23's accounts. So that's a national backstop. So if that comes to pass, then firms would be expected to sign off one way or the other, even if that be a qualified opinion by the 30th of September 2024, worth emphasising. So that's where we are. The end is in sight, but I do think it's a long way off.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Willetts.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, can I congratulate the portfolio holder for the delivery of the refurbished premises for our staff to work in, which is clearly an achievement given the problems we had over COVID. Roan House now looks splendid from the outside. I have yet to go inside. In fact, I rolled up with my sandwiches at lunchtime and I could get in through the front door, but I couldn't get any further. And there was no chair to sit on. But fortunately, kindly Essex County Council have their foyer next door, invited me in and gave me a chair. So I was very happy. So I've almost got there, but not quite. Secondly, can I congratulate you on the way that the budget is being presented this year, you and your team. I'm not a chartered accountant, although the Conservative group, I seem to be surrounded by chartered accountants. I'm merely a chartered engineer. But it's getting to the point now where the way the budget is presented is becoming transparent to non-experts. And I think this is a great step forward. We're beginning to see the budget presented on the basis of services rather than amorphous departments. And I think there has been a rapid move in the right direction. And I congratulate you on your team on the way things have improved and the ease of understanding what we have this year. In terms of a serious question, you're the portfolio holder for resources for the council, and clearly you must be working alongside whoever is responsible for resources in the companies at a rather difficult time when we are run down. I'm not sure whether that is the correct word. I mean, some say hibernating, although Company House doesn't recognise the word hibernate. It's either dormancy or operating fully. But the companies are taking a lesser role in the delivery of services. And I wondered whether this particular exercise is causing you any specific difficulties, because it would seem to a non-expert that there is a fairly complex web of interrelated resources, personnel and so on, which will take quite a bit of unscrambling, particularly given that we're not sure what the end point is in the documents that you're discussing this. So there doesn't seem to be a clear goal for how the resources will be separated, repatriated back into the City Council.
Thank you, Dennis. I think it's a fundamentally complex and important piece of work that is taking place, but a lot of thought has gone behind it. I'd give a lot of credit to Richard Carr for his leadership on this, and his vision actually has been to how do we bring together the work, how do we bring them back together in terms of, for example, some of the assets and estates team are now back within CCC, so to speak. So at times it has given me concern, and I expressed it to both the leader and to the chief executive, and wanted to ensure Richard Carr actually would stay for longer than was planned, which he is doing. So he's going to stay for one day a week to continue his sort of vision of bringing them back together. I do really have a lot of trust in the model that he's pursuing. I do feel, and I actually spoke with Chris Hartgrove today about some of those elements of the companies, some of the risk and liability, but also we are fairly clear that within this year's budget, we will be for some of the costs of how the restructuring will work, but there could be elements of cost, which I think, again, we've discussed at Governance and Audit Committee as well, where we still have to cover a certain amount of costs, which will be to do with assets and even the odd cost if we lose redundancy or what have you. But apart from that, I wouldn't say it's been an obstacle, but it's been carefully thought through. And it has at times, as I say, expressed my concern that I wanted to ensure the leadership remained there, carrying out the vision. I do think it's the right thing to do, and therefore actually we will reduce duplication, we will reduce complication by most of the companies coming back in and the dormant ones, the ones being made dormant. So I do think actually it will be less complex going forward, but you're right, it isn't the easiest thing to do. It's an unraveling of what was set up a number of years ago, but I think under Richard's leadership and with what I've explained, we're getting there.
If the companies become dormant, you'll be able to hold assets in those companies, but you will not be able to have any transactions which reflect the degeneration of those assets in any way. Bearing in mind that there's a significant number of assets which are holes in the ground, which are filling up with water and sort of slowly losing their value. How are we going to deal with the depreciation of those assets if the companies are dormant? Because they will rapidly get to the point where the liabilities of the company, which is principally assets in holes in the ground, will no longer show positive on the balance sheet.
I may bring in Chris here as well. That is a technical question, and one that we again have talked about and worked through. I'll ask Chris for his advice on that one. Essentially, from my understanding of it, there would be a cost to ensuring the ground source heat pumps work if we are to bring them back to life, so to speak. But in terms of how we actually account for those and account for depreciation of an asset, I'll ask Chris to come in.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just follow that up? As well as the depreciation of the asset, there is the BEIS delivery plan grant of £3.3 million and also a loan from CCC to the energy company of 2.5 million. I can see no provision in our medium-term financial forecast for the repayment or repatriation of those, but you're suggesting it's in this year's budget, so presumably we can discuss this later on.
Okay, I saw Councillor Sunix.
Yes. The restructuring knock to reserves is something that could and should have been calculated, I feel, before we did it. It's just a comment. Before we made decisions on what we're doing, we should try and work out the accounting implications. And, you know, I want to talk later about reserves, and they're not infinite. And we don't know what they are. And we really need to sort of get to the bottom of that more. The question I had for Councillor Corey is a cultural one around Fit for the Future. Because we've got a list of cuts and ameliorations to our budget position, which is obviously had a lot of work from the finance team. And I would echo other people's comments about the presentation being a lot better this year than it was last year. We got a whole lot of cuts and lists of particular ways we move staff around and so on, but we're not hearing about the central strategic point, which has come over from the Chief Executive and from the Leader of the Council very clearly, and I think very sensibly, saying we've got to do less. So my question for the portfolio holder resources are, what are we going to do less? And if we continue trying to do the same, are we unfairly dumping on our staff and asking them to take pay cuts and take on more work? And I fear, I keep on going on about salami slicing, but I fear we're really going to degrade the council if we don't try and identify where we're going to do less. And if we are doing less, what is in your mind?
Thank you. So the Fit for the Future programme, we came about with that title more recently, but the transformation and the culture of it and the research done has taken months. It has taken a lot of time of officers, and with the Chief Executive again, with her culture of making sure it's grassroots listening to begin with, and then it has been driven by the departmental leads, and you would have seen some of the presentations about how we have realigned our different departments and how the senior leadership team is now a much wider team. So I feel that it has been a sort of bottom-up approach where it has been driven by departments, so they understand what they can manage and what they can't. And I want to thank across the board the officers in the council, and Richard Block, for example, who's working with you this evening, has driven a lot of this programme as well. We do have to do less, that's absolutely right. So one example, you're having the business case about guardrails. Stopping a non-statutory service and then providing it as a paid-for service is one way. And we know that the environment service is a large service within the council. So that's one large implication for you. There are other ways in which we feel that we have excellent teams across the council that provide support to residents, but perhaps by reducing some of the teams, we will see a turnaround of perhaps a day more when it comes to residents receiving support, bearing in mind we're again ahead. For example, if you're getting support on housing benefit, we get round to dealing with residents really quickly, but with some efficiencies we will have less in teams, so perhaps it will be a day longer. We've also got what I announced earlier, the local council tax support scheme going to a banded scheme, means we have a lot less administration to do. So it's across all areas. We will be looking at where we can reduce or where we can invest in a team to actually bring in more income. So it's not just about cutting back, it is also about increasing income, investing in certain areas. So for example, an area you've been interested in as well, the broadband, we've got to look at a business case going forward of, do we invest in a service like that further? We've got 4 options that have gone to the council companies board, and we will be looking at that. For example, do we do less and take an income out of it? Do we do more, invest and see of a larger income? So overall, those are a few examples, but overall we're taking the sort of thoughts from the management, from grassroots, and understanding, okay, we are going to have to do a number of different things differently, some things less. I've given examples there. Some statutory services we will allow perhaps a slower turnaround. Some non-statutory services we have had to drop.
I've been involved in a lot of big corporate cost-cutting programs. I've never seen one that tries to be so bottom-up, which, you know, it's worth applauding. I just feel it needs a lot more clarity and leadership if it's going to have any chance of success.
So David just said we have explained that we will have further briefings on this in February and March. And Chief Executive will be doing that, leading that in particular, and a lot of that will be about the delivery. So as we've worked through, we've had discussion about the transformation, what the plans will be. We have fairly high-level plans. We've got more detail in the budget this time, and then, as I'm sure the Chief Executive will explain, we will have the delivery method explained to us further as we go along.
Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to speak. And Councillor Sunnox, I think I can give you some reassurance around what happens next. So on the 1st of February, the Senior Leadership Board will be bringing to our informal Cabinet meeting, which we describe as leadership team, the next iteration of Fit for the Future. Obviously, you've seen elements of it embedded in the budget, but that isn't sufficient. What you need to see is that detail fleshed out. And there are 3 important documents that will accompany that first cut of the Fit for the Future proposals. One is a very detailed HR plan. So how are we going to support our staff through a period of retrenchment? And I can assure you, it was not a bottom-up suggestion that we cut our staffing by 25%. That came from the senior leadership team of this authority in order to cope within our financial envelope. That's the first one. The second one will be a detailed communications plan that will focus on 3 key audiences. First of all, our staff. Secondly, our members. And thirdly, our external stakeholders. And the third one will be a governance paper, which will set out how, at the request of the administration, members will be involved in having oversight of the implementation. That's the first opportunity. However, there'll be a second at this meeting in February, where this panel will be able to scrutinise some of the detail around how are we actually going to deliver the Fit for the Future aspirations. What services will be reduced? What services will be delivered differently? For example, shared services. And then finally, it will come to Cabinet the following month, where there will be a public opportunity for people to have their say. So I hope that gives you a sense that you haven't seen everything there is. We're still developing that. And only today, in our Senior Leadership Board, we had a very good discussion about how that's going to move forward. But there's a lot more detail to come. I hope that's helpful.
It is helpful, and thank you very much. You described what we're going to do to achieve it. What we need to know when we're contemplating in the budget is what we're going to do less of. And that seems to still be incredibly vague. We're going to cut staff by 25%, but we're going to still do the same number of things. It's going to be a disaster. We must know for the budget what we're going to do less of.
We are most definitely not going to do the same number of things. And I just want to go back to your earlier reference to expecting staff to do exactly the same with less staff and with pay pressures as well. And that's an unrealistic expectation. It's unfair, it's not ethical. There's a whole variety of reasons why that can't happen, particularly the well-being of our staff, which has been under severe pressure for the last 15 years, essentially, since the financial crisis. So that's not going to happen. I actually think it's going to be quite a challenge, actually, to persuade our fantastic staff that they can do less. I think we're going to have to make it clear that they have permission. In fact, there is no other way. And no, we don't have all of the detail, but our Section 151 officer and his deputy have sufficient confidence in the Fit for the Future programme as it currently stands to be able to stand behind the budget and give you their reassurance that we will be doing less, in some cases significantly less, and in other cases we'll be reducing services to the point where they are unrecognisable, and that will be a very, very difficult thing for our communities to accept. But at the same time, we're investing in those communities to make sure that they are enabled to do things differently with our support. So take your point, and there is a lot more detail to come, but there is a governance process now agreed through which you will scrutinise and agree those proposals. Thank you.
Thank you for that explanation. Okay, I'm looking around the room and I'm not seeing anyone else with their hand up. I just wonder if, thank you very much, Councillor Corey. I just wonder if maybe I can give you some homework, because I heard there in Councillor Willett's probing around the dormant companies and the assets, and I heard there that there is work ongoing around the technical arrangements for what happens with those assets. I wonder if it would be appropriate for you to consider, when the work is done, sharing that with Cabinet, so that Cabinet are clear and there is a matter of public record of what is happening technically with those assets. Because I know Councillor Willett's mentioned that that one in particular might depreciate, but you might have other assets that are appreciating. And you are our go-to guy to find out about the resources that are within the gift of this authority and that matter to the people of Colchester. So if you would be minded to put it on your homework sheet to, at the appropriate time, unless the room disagrees with me, but it's quite a firm recommendation from me, if you're minded, that that Cabinet be briefed about what happens to those assets from any dormant companies. Is that okay, Councillor Corey?
Absolutely, and Cabinet would be. I think it's about wider briefing as well, and it's likely to come up for governance and audit, I would say, around the companies and that process, and understanding the risks, the liabilities and the costs, depreciation, etc. So absolutely agree, that will be something we will provide publicly through Cabinet, but then through scrutiny as well, whether that be your committee or the Governance and Audit Committee.
Mr. Chairman, do I make that a formal recommendation from the panel?
Yes, please. I think it's a fair recommendation. Thank you. Great. Okay, right. Does anyone else wish to have a conversation with Councillor Corey this evening, or shall we relieve him for the next part of the matters on the agenda? I'm very happy that we move on. Thank you. Okay, right. Chris, sorry, we believe there is a technical issue with your microphone, sir. So we just want to bring that to your attention. And so to your left there, Councillor King, if you need it, go for it. But okay, right, let's move on. So we are also welcoming here this evening another portfolio holder for Waste and Neighbourhood Services, Councillor Martin Goss. Councillor Goss, the report before us is one which we're going to have a lively, no doubt, conversation around, but just for clarity for anyone watching at home and for the matter of the record, the decision on this item has been made by your Cabinet. The charges for green waste is underway as we speak. We do not have the ability in this room tonight to change that, but the report before us sets out some of the income projections and gives us an indication of how you are accounting for some of the costs as well as the income. And the accountants in the room will no doubt have lots of questions for you, but I'll give you the floor.
Good evening. Rosa and John will go into probably some of the more detailed financial business case verbiage, but I'll just give you a more high-level overview. Happy to take any questions, but I might defer them. So, as we're aware, in June 2023, the Cabinet decision was taken to create an opt-in paid-for service, which launched in January 2024. And obviously, I was involved in that decision. Ultimately, following scrutiny in this very room, we took feedback on board, tried to remove the politics from it, and we created a joining fee of £35 per bin and £55 per bin for it to be emptied. The service has now launched. My wheelie bin was emptied last week. I haven't had a wheelie bin before, but I now have an official one for garden waste, and it was emptied no problem, and the service seems to be operating at a pretty optimum level at the moment with very few issues reported on social media or online. So we had a target of 11% going back to November 2023 when we launched the service, to then have the collections commence in the middle of January 2024, the period we're now in. And some of that was scrutinised at the previous meeting in this very room. We also had a target of only 7,758 properties and an income target of £600,000, although there's some complexity about this being split over different years, which will come up tonight. Some of it, and all this was signed off by the Section 151 officer, so we accounted for it properly. So the good news is that we are currently subscribing 22% of our households, which is double the original business case. Right? So from an income point of view, we've more than adequately beaten the targets in the business case, and that has tended to be the experience of other councils such as Braintree, such as Basildon. If I recall correctly, I think something like 65% of Basildon residents have signed up, although Colchester is a different dynamic, I think, in terms of geography, etc. And bear in mind, we're in winter. So, you know, really when things start to grow, you'll see that go even further. So this is at the beginning. And if you recall, we also did a 15 months for the price of 12 offer as well. So the earlier you sign up, the more you got, which takes you through to April 2025. So at this moment in time, as of yesterday, because the figures continue to move, literally there could be people here watching this meeting feeling motivated to go and sign up for garden waste, and the figures will continue to move. But as of yesterday, 24% of residents had signed up, so it's moved on even since the report was written, and that is that means we've now got 16,796 residents, or households I should say, signed up. And the income in the particular period is £780,731 income. So I'm not going to go into too many more figures because we've got Rosa and John to go and jump into a lot more detail. It's also fair to say that we did put aside a £50,000 budget for help for those that needed it on local council tax support, and certainly some people have taken that offer up, but again, we can talk about that later on in the detail. But I hope that gives you a bit of flavour as to where we are, that the scheme has been more successful than maybe some of the pundits, including in this room, including externally, have would expect it to be. And of course, it will continue to grow, as I've described tonight, because it's online and people can sign up for it. So happy to pass to Rosa.
I think Councillor McLean just has a quick question for you before we move on to the officers.
Thank you. I'm just wondering how you came to the figure of 11% as a target, because saying you're over target doesn't mean anything. You could set a low target and then achieve over that. It's a way of massaging it to make it sound better. Well, yes, really.
No, not really. Because when you do a business case, you have to make the figures work. So at that lower figure, this would make the business case actually stack up at the original, for the original income and the amount of bins that we were obviously going to sell, and obviously the bin lorries and the routes. So it would have been absolutely correct to pick me up if we hadn't hit 11%, because then we wouldn't have started to hit some of the financials and the income targets. But the majority of council business cases, including Basildon, including Braintree, we obviously spoke to other councils, and this is similar to what other councils have done, because obviously you have to go on data from other councils and in the industry as well, and that is partially what we did to try and come up with that figure. So it was an accurate reflection based on other people's business cases, and of course Basildon was also launching, as was Braintree. So if we just arbitrarily made up a figure, I agree, but we didn't just arbitrarily make up a figure. We based it on other people's experience and other people's data, And I'm pleased to say that we have exceeded that target. Exceeding the target is only a good thing for the council, surely, because it means the income is higher, which potentially means we can offset other cuts possibly. So, you know, let's apply a little bit of logic to any argument, shall we? But happy to take any more questions, and then we'll let Rosa do more detail.
Thank you. Whose data was it based on? Did we have any data that we could base it on?
Yeah, I mean, it's been through scrutiny already, because you had a look at this at last meeting. We're actually scrutinising the business case tonight, more around some of the data that was felt not to be there. So I think this has already been scrutinised, in fairness. And I think we're actually scrutinising this from a slightly different angle.
Let's move on. Rosa, nice to see you.
Hello. So I'm just going to carry on from Councillor Goss's points and talk a little bit more about the financial case, because I understand that is what the panel would like to look at. So just to summarise the report, full council in February 2023 approved an increase to the garden waste income, which had originally been set as a target of 200,000 to 600,000 for the current financial year, resulting in a net revenue improvement. In August, Cabinet were then presented and approved a new revised proposal, the net revenue impact for the current financial year of 15,000, but with a target of 1.321 million in the following financial year. And that the changes in those targets and those revenue impacts was as a result of a few things. Firstly, in the way that the income could be accounted. So you can only account for the income in the year that the service is being received. There were obviously some changes, as mentioned by Councillor Goss, around the original fees and discounts that were set originally. Ultimately, the business case put forward that there would be an improved revenue impact over the 2 financial years in excess of 1.3 million. So now that we've launched, what the report now sets out is the forecasted operational costs at period 9 for the current financial year, including one-off costs for the launch, are 271,000, and a total income is being received of around 767,000, and that's resulting in a net income for the council of 471,000. The introduction of the local council tax support discount that's been mentioned has been deducted from that reported income. So for context, those that are on local council tax support receive a free joining fee for their first bin. And that is resulting in a reduction in that net income of 22,890, but that's already been deducted in the table that you've been presented with. In the forthcoming year, so into 24-25, you will hear later this evening the report, the 24-25 revenue budget, and within that there is an item that proposes additional gross income of 1.246 million for garden waste. Just for clarity, this is calculated on the basis of 1.896 million, which is set out in table 5.7 of the report, less 600,000, which was the original agreed amount at full council in February, plus £50,000 credit claim income. So the estimated budget for the forthcoming year includes expenditure of 699,000 and income of 2 million, resulting in a net income of 1.3 million for the council. Now, there's in terms of savings, operational savings have and will be achieved through strategic staff adjustments and vehicle management. So notably, there is a net decrease in the fleet portfolio of 1 refuse collection vehicle, and that's saving approximately £31,000 annually. So the new chargeable service is starting with 3 vehicles and 3 crews, expanding to 4 as we need it to ensure that we're delivering a fantastic service for our residents. Redeployed staff will fill vacancies that we're currently holding, and that will minimise the impact of the current recruitment freeze. The council will also sell 2 of the existing vehicles, and ultimately that strategic approach defers capital investment and some ongoing budget pressures. So to summarise, it is acknowledged that not all will be supportive of the introduction of this service, but in these challenging financial times, we are pleased to report that the garden waste collection service has not only met but exceeded performance expectations. Financial implications have been carefully managed with strategic adjustments ensuring operational efficiencies and savings. There's been a multidisciplinary team across the whole council that have worked tirelessly to launch this service and did so last Monday. And they have remained committed throughout to ensuring that Colchester residents continue to receive a good standard of service throughout this process, and wherever possible, they will look to achieve and exceed that as well. So I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you for that. Okay. Councillor Summits.
Yes, congratulations on the take-up rate, which I guess is good news, although raising more tax, we all know, is massively unpopular. And but I guess from the council's point of view, it's good news. What I want to ask about is perhaps jumping ahead a little bit.
Can we just talk terminology correctly, please? It's not tax, it's a service charge because they're paying for service. It can't be added to your council tax bill by law because it's not allowed by government, and government allows you to bill for it separately as a service charge. It is not a tax. So can we be really crystal clear on language, if you would mind?
Whatever it is, Councillor Goss, it's massively unpopular. But I'm congratulating the organisation for getting a higher take-up, and so that's good. What I'm worried about is jumping ahead a little bit to the budget and using the opportunity of you being here. If you look at the cost centres for the budget in Appendix A, you see that the costs have gone up like sort of 32%, some of the costs 40% up, the other costs outside the garden waste. And so my question is, what's going on there? And, you know, we're allocating 699,000 to this, and that's netted off, I think, in the garden waste line. But the other lines, it's sort of whack-a-mole. You punch one down and the other ones pop up. And I just wanted to ask what's going on there, and are we really saving cost?
I'll have to just refer to Appendix if that's okay, and come back to that in a moment. Is that okay?
Thank you. Okay, I'm looking around the room. I see Councillor Willits.
Chairman, it might be worth thinking back to what actually happened in August. The Scrutiny Committee, a panel looked at certain aspects of the scheme at the request of the leader. And we made comments on its acceptability and several other issues, which we sent back to Cabinet and were thanked. The reason the matter has come back to us today was that, along with the officer report, there was a partial presentation of the business case, which was at that time incomplete. And it was not possible to determine at the meeting whether it was incomplete on purpose or whether the information was just not available, which is why the matter was put down on our work programme again to examine the business case as and when there was sufficient data for it to be done in a coherent and sensible manner. And clearly that has been done today. We have the data before us, although there's still one or two loose ends which I wish to pursue. Now, perhaps the reason why we need to see the business case is that there are several competing services within the waste and recycling portfolio. There's the general waste collection service, the council tax service, which we benchmark against other councils to ensure that we're doing it well. There is a proposal to actually increase the commercial waste collection service in this budget, which we'll be coming to shortly when we get onto the budget. And many of us think that it's unfair that there should be any subsidy for commercial waste collection, which is in competition with other businesses. We're actually paying the business rates to provide the local authority with which to provide the service. So I certainly believe that we want a very clear business case for both the council tax service, the commercial waste collection service, and also we now have a very clear business case for the garden waste collection which is being introduced. And looking at the figures, Chairman, I think financially, I mean, there are those amongst us who believe that it's a bad thing in principle, but in terms of a financial exercise, it has been superbly successful. If one looks at the papers we've got on from the 9th of August and today, prior to this exercise kicking off, here was a service which was actually costing the administration £1.8 million a year to provide, albeit to some 70,000 customers in the borough. That has been transformed over the course of 2 years from a cost of 1.8 million to a profit of 1.3 million in terms of the surplus revenue which we're getting in. So from a financial point of view, we're actually 3 million, almost £3 million better off by the decision to implement garden waste, which I think is quite a phenomenal turnaround. If rather than looking at the overall position, though, we look at the business case, it's very clearly set out in paragraph 5.7, where the cost of providing the reduced service, and it is a reduced service compared with what was being done, instead of £1.8 million, the cost now comes down to 699,000, because we're only dealing with 15,900, or perhaps a little more than that, as Councillor Goss was saying today. And there is the revenue coming in of 2 million, which means that if we look at it as a self-contained service, as opposed to comparing it with the previous position that we're doing, it gives a profit of 1.3, and that's all very clear and understandable. The issue which we discussed vaguely at the August meeting, but never really managed to fathom out what was going on, was what it meant to the council if we have resources to collect from every house, which has a cost of £1.8 million, and we're now reducing that to a resource which is only going to collect from 15,900 houses, which costs 699,000, which effectively means that somewhere in the system there is £1 million which has been sort of liberated and is now at the disposal of the cabinet to use as they wish. One of the issues that we were concerned with was what would happen to the operatives and the vehicles which would no longer be used on the service, given that it was only doing a quarter of the task that had previously been carried out. And those questions were not answered at the 9th of August, neither in terms of the number of staff involved or what would happen to those staff and how the £1 million would be reapplied within the budget. The paper we have before us today clearly sets out what is going to happen to that surplus. First of all, 0.25 of a person year and a vehicle will go towards improving the service that we give to the flats. And secondly, perhaps more importantly for those of us who value our staff, there will be no redundancies because we don't need so many people to run this scheme, and that the people who were previously doing garden waste collections but are not needed now will go to backfill the vacancies, a surprising number of vacancies which there are for the council tax collection service. And that is indeed good news to know that the funds liberated are now being used wisely. There is another knock-on which I've not been able to get to the bottom of. If we use those staff to backfill posts which are vacant and are currently being covered by agency staff, there should be a significant reduction somewhere in the budget in agency staff, equivalent to the number of our operatives who are no longer needed to collect garden waste. And I cannot find that particular reduction in the budget. Clearly, we're not discussing the budget at the moment, but perhaps it will be possible later on to discuss where the agency staff reduction is being made. And looking at the ledger, which is kindly supplied to us by the Finance Department, agency staff on waste for the first 9 months was some £365,000, with an expectation of the full year agency staff for waste collections being £486,000. And again, I cannot find that in the budget papers, although I'm sure it's there. And so really to round off our understanding of what is happening here, I would really like to know if we are backfilling the posts, we are reducing the agency staff. If we're reducing the agency staff, where is that in the budget? Because I don't see it. Now, it may well be that the answer to that is we don't really operate at that level of granularity, and it gets mopped up in the overall pool of savings. But it is a large sum. It's a large sum of £1 million, of which there would still be some £500,000 left over, even if the backfill is wholly successful. So that's what I want to understand now. Good business case, fully understand the profitability of the service, but I don't understand what happens when we backfill the posts, why we don't see a reduction in the agency costs of £500,000 in the budget. Thank you.
Councillor Goss.
Thank you for the very detailed questions, Councillor Willits. I will refer to Rosa, who has all the figures in front of her, and I'm sure astound you with the responses.
I'm not sure I can astound, but I can explain the situation in regards to backfilling and agency, etc. So as I set out within the report, we've got quite a substantial staffing workforce. It's one of the biggest areas of the council. And just to kind of go back to the foundations, that workforce works incredibly hard, all weathers, all weeks of the year. They're some of the lower paid staff in the organisation as well, but do a very good job. By the nature of their work being quite physical, there are knock-on effects in terms of sickness, and we do see a relatively high level of sickness within the service as a result of the nature of their work. And I am really pleased to report that over the last year, hopefully you will have seen that through the KPIs, we've seen a really significant decrease in the amount of absences and periods of absences, particularly within neighbourhood services, and that's all credit to the managers who've been supporting and managing the workforce. In addition to that, the team are very conscious of the budget situation and have been working incredibly hard to reduce our reliance on agency. And there is a cabinet paper due to come, I think, to the next cabinet meeting that proposes some new arrangements around our agency contract that hopefully will see a further reduction in the cost of using agency. But again, by the nature of the work that they do, unlike office-based staff or even myself, if I'm sick, nobody replaces me, but I need somebody to replace a HGV driver, because if we don't, the bins don't get collected. So our reliance on agency is quite significant, but we've been working really hard to reduce that. And I say all of this because our use of agency has been quite high over the last few years, but our budget to deliver that has been incredibly low, £20,000. And I think the reality of that means that we need to balance what we do. Let me go back. Is we balance vacancies and absences and look at the overall staffing budget to manage the staffing costs. So both the contracted staff and agency staff, and try and deliver that service within that financial envelope. But going into the next financial year, there's a recognition that that is unrealistic and a continued budget pressure that's not acceptable. So the budget for the forthcoming financial year is proposed to up that so that it's more realistic and recognises those challenges. So in terms of the report that I've presented, we do have staff turnover, again, by the nature of the work, not just because of sickness, but people come and go. We've been holding some vacancies. They will automatically fill those vacancies, and that's happened already. But there will continually be some turnover and some vacancies that we'll need to make sure that we're filling. So overall, there is not a reduction in our staffing costs, both staffing pay and agency, but we are working really hard to understand the establishment going forward and reevaluate that. And some of that work, again, will feed into the waste strategy piece that we're also working on through the Environment Sustainability Panel, and planning and mapping out what our staffing requirements will be in the forthcoming for the future sort of midterm financial forecast going forward, and understanding what the staffing need will be as we go through that strategy development.
Perhaps I'm a bit dim, Chairman. I still don't understand. 2 years ago, we were paying in your department, there was expenditure of £1.8 million to run the garden waste service. This year in your department, there will be cost of £699,000 to run the waste department. There's a bit of adjustment for reusable bags, which are no longer needed, and so on. But the net reduction in resources which you need, however you conjure it up within your department, it has gone down by £1 million. And you're suggesting that your agency cost is 20,000. I would have thought that with the people that are available now, within that £1 million reduction in resource that you need, that you would be in a position to replace all agency. Unless I've missed.
So I think I've explained this previously. Let me try and use more simple language. Maybe it might help in explaining it. This service will always use agency staff. There will always be the need for agency staff of some kind to cover sickness, training, and holidays. That will always be a requirement. But by moving some of the garden waste crew that are no longer picking up garden waste, we will have backfilled some of those existing vacancies, because one of the things I've been trying to drive is to get more permanent HGV drivers and more permanent loaders. There is an issue with HGV drivers in the industry that actually goes back to COVID, where we didn't have enough in this country. We don't seem to have enough of anything in this country, whether it be HGV drivers, loaders, hotel workers, construction workers, NHS workers, you name it, we haven't got enough of them. And we know the reasons why. So HGV drivers are no different. It is a skill. You need to be trained. It costs thousands of pounds to be trained to be an HGV driver. And one of the things we have done is we have trained some of our own staff, tying them into a contract. So if they leave early, they have to pay some of that cost back. No different than any other organisation I've worked for. If we spend thousands of pounds on people's personal training and development. And what we've tried to do is therefore increase the ratio of permanent staff. Now, you may recall that I spoke before that the ratio was probably something like 70-30 or 80-20 in terms of permanent staff to agency staff, and I committed to try and level that down a little bit. That is what we're trying to do here. So we've moved some permanent staff to backfill positions, or not to bring agency staff in. But the bottom line is the agency budget has always been overspent, because I don't think it's ever been realistic. I think we've tried to adjust that now. And we will always need agency staff where, although we tie the agencies down by good negotiation to have an hourly rate, there will always be national insurance contributions in that rate, and there'll always be a profit margin. But again, we try to control that profit margin so we're not paying a 30% markup or anything like that. So I hope that explains how the service has to operate on a daily basis. I've been there. I tell you what, I would love every councillor to go and visit Shrub End at 6:30 in the morning and actually go and see what goes on with, you know, over 100 staff turning up, including agency. And some of the agency don't turn up. So we might say tomorrow to the agents or the agencies, get my teeth in, we need 20 people tomorrow because we've got 10 people on holiday. We've got a couple doing training, and we're probably expecting a bit of sickness. And therefore we have to try and, you know, the leadership team has to manage this, not me. I'm probably in bed or out litter picking at that time of the morning. But this has to be managed, and you know, it's complex. It's complex. So I hope that explains it in terms of how we operate and what we've tried to do, and gives you a bit more of an answer. But
No, I still don't quite grasp it. Agency staff cost us more considerably more. There's significant markup, 35% markup on the cost of the staff. We employ £500,000 worth of agency staff within your portfolio. Because of the introduction of garden waste, we have a number of collection teams valued at £1 million on the figures that we've been given, who are no longer doing garden collection. I would have thought the first priority in your portfolio holder would have been to use those people to displace agency staff, because that leads to a considerable reduction in your operating costs. And what you're telling me is that you have this sudden surplus of people because you only need a quarter of your previous staff to collect garden waste, and you're not going to use them to displace agency staff, which actually cost us. It's the most expensive way of doing the job. And I hear what you say. I sort of believe that that's what you're going to do, but I just don't understand why your first priority is not getting rid of agency staff by using the people who are no longer collecting garden waste because they only do a quarter of what was originally done. And I just don't understand why that isn't your first priority.
I'm not sure if I'm not speaking a clear language this evening, but that's exactly what I've said we are doing. I've clearly said we have reduced the amount of agency staff because we have filled them with more permanent vacancies. That's what I said. I mean, you can listen back to the recording, but that's what I clearly said, and I'm getting nods from other members of the committee. So I have said that's what we've done. Whether it equates to pound on pound in the finances, I'll leave Rosa and John to grapple with that. But in essence, we have done that.
Thank you for the enlightenment. I think we get the sentiment, although I think Councillor Willis might remain dissatisfied around understanding the presentation around the figures to be absolutely crystal clear. That's what I think I'm hearing. Councillor Corey.
I just wanted to say that they're the right questions to ask. I asked the same question to Rosa, and I had a fairly good response on this because I wanted to, as you would expect, squeeze the pips and say, oh, we're going to make some savings. But I'm sure we can share the response. We've tried to explain it, but one of the response you gave me, Rosa, if it's right to do so, I can share with Councillor Willits, because it was helpful talking about the number of staff that actually would move over, about the complete reduction in agency staff, but also the fact that the vacant posts that we've been holding can be filled. And for me, the answer was it creates a lot more resilience. We believe that there are a few £1,000s that we will save, but actually instead of squeezing them at this transitional point, we're allowing that backfilling and resilience to occur. So yes, could I have gone back to Rosa and said, can we put 20,000 down? Can we put that back in the budget? But I'm actually taking the answer that I can share with you to say, actually, I would prefer the resilience of this transitional period. And then we'll be looking over the next sort of forthcoming years, as we go forward. But I think the response here I got from Rosa, I can share with you because it was helpful for me to answer that question. I believe if we really wrung the service out, we could get a few pennies out, but it's about the resilience going forward over the next few months while this service is bedding in, and then the increase in the garden waste service. Again, putting another loader back in, we need to make sure we got a driver and the staff that's needed for that. So that's how I took it, and I was reassured, but the right kind of question.
Okay, so to take this forward, are you in a position to share some numbers to Councillor Willets, copying in the panel so that we can see it and hopefully draw a line and get that clarity? And I also hear Councillor Sunnox, if it's a brief point, please.
It is a brief point. You say you've squeezed the pips. Can I suggest you add together the cost centres 2671s, 7277 and 80 for the last year's budget and this year's budget. That's all the costs, all the waste cost centres, excluding the garden waste. You'll see there's been a 40% increase there. And I just think there's probably, if the garden waste figures are right, this is a very short way of making Councillor Willets' point. If the garden waste figures are right, then there's a huge amount of budget increase there that we can ill afford. And I would, as a financial controller of many years standing, I would have my knife ready. Yes, we want a bit more resilience, but not £1 million worth more of resilience. It's a big figure.
No, understood. It's not that once you backfill staff, but yeah, we'll share what we have, and that's figures about staff as well as money, but it's more to do with staff.
Okay, thank you. I think we get it. Councillor Law.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got a couple of questions, really. Firstly, I'd like to thank all the crews and waste collection services, because it's a really tough job outdoors year round, and they do a really tough job. A lot of residents wouldn't fancy doing. We really value their service and their hard work. We were really glad in the Labour group to see that there was going to be support for residents on the local council tax support scheme. And I know that there was a figure in the report for take up, I think, from that cohort. Would you be able to say what sort of percentage there is of residents who are on LCTS who are subscribing? And my second question is around the sort of take-up subscription in terms of the geographical spread, and if there's a greater spread in the more far-flung rural areas, is that accounted for in terms of extra resourcing and fuel and times and things, timings going forward, and how that fits into figures? Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to bring in John Kellett, who's the Business Improvement Manager for Neighbourhood Services. Thank you.
Hello, Councillor Law. So I'm just going to try and take those in order. In terms of LCTS, we currently have 718 successful applications. We have spent just over 50% of the budget. So we're quite pleased with that degree of sign up. We also check 100% of the applications, and those residents who aren't entitled then have to either have a refund or pay the joining fee, which is effectively what the discount discounts. So effectively, I think the LCTS element is going very smoothly. In terms of the budget will be just over 1,200 customers we'll be able to support. We will, I think, run that until we reach that target. So that's LCTS. I think the next question you had was around geography, I think, and in terms of geography, the take-up is varied. Those areas of town with small gardens or concrete gardens or a lot of flats, take-up is lower. Those areas that are more rural, take-up is higher. What does that mean in practice? Well, we have subscribed a bin for every 4 houses right the way across the city. So effectively, we are driving 100% of the route that we were driving with 5.25 lorries with 3 lorries, but we're doing less pickups. Now, as we get more pickups, as we discussed earlier, we've reached 24% sign up today. As we get more sign-ups, we'll have to do more collection, and that's where our extra vehicle will come in, because we will run out of resource, and we absolutely need to make sure that the service is resilient and reliable. So effectively, I think that's probably answered the question. The highest take-up is in the rural north, closely followed by some of the other rural wards. But there are areas in town which are popular, like Prettygate, for instance, with good sign up in Prettygate, and I don't think we're particularly surprised about that. I think Castle is the smaller of the wards, and I think again we expect that because of the types of property.
Councillor Law, are you happy? Okay, Councillor Goss.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and there's an extra layer to put on top of that, of course, because some areas they're taking more than one bin, and actually the take up of households having more than one bin was higher than we'd probably anticipated. So places like rural north or Highwoods, they've taken more than one bin because of the size of garden, or I guess the amount of leaves they have to clear in the period. So that also pushes up the revenue as well, of course.
Okay, thank you. I'm looking around the room. I'm happy that we move on if everyone else is. And at this point, I'll point out that we probably do need a break. So we will come back here, please, at 7:50. That's 14 minutes, please, if that's okay. Thank you very much. Right. We move on to the thoroughly exciting part of the evening, the scrutiny of the budget. Now, if folks are minded, what I wonder about doing here, and I realise there might be some darting all over the place, so I'm going to ask everyone to take their time to be very clear on what page we're looking at, so that everyone in the room has a chance to be involved. I wonder if we should look at the general fund and the MTFF as one, then move on to the HRA as one, and then do CapEx as one. I wonder if that's a way of trying to streamline this and get into the skin of it. And unless anyone objects, I'd like to do that. So before we do that, though, I think we have Councillor Young who wished to speak in an untimed fashion about the budget. So you have the microphone, Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll be brief. It's about one specific issue, and it's about the, the survey that we were sent, a 2-question survey. It's a very flawed survey, I have to say, hardly a survey at all, and very simplistic. And I don't want us to go down that route in the future. So that's a point I'd like to make to the scrutiny panel. If we're going to have a survey of members about the budget, then let's make it a proper survey and not as simplistic as that. But what came out of that survey, to the I think minority of councillors who actually responded to it, was that the one area that they wanted, or didn't want, but because of situation, I'm sure we'll get into the politics at the February budget meeting, as we usually do, was the PR, comms and marketing came out top of where savings should be made. A budget of some £600,000. Now, a little bit has been shaved off that because the very sensible decision has been made not to go ahead with merging the CBH and CCC, financial inclusion and welfare rights and benefits teams, which the Labour group are very exercised about and don't think should happen, not now, probably not ever. But that budget seems to be protected, and I think what we need is a very clear breakdown. I'm someone who works in PR, comms and marketing, and have done before and do again now. £600,000 is a heck of a lot for that service. So I think unless we see an absolute breakdown, I think it's really important, PR, comms and marketing, and you've worked in that sector as well. It seems a lot of money, and it was identified as the top for savings to be made. So I think we need a detailed breakdown of what that budget consists of to see that if we, because the Labour group, like your group, no doubt, are still formulating what their plans will be for the budget council meeting in February. We need, unless we see where we can make savings and perhaps switch resources into areas that may be more important to us or to you or to anybody. But at the moment, that's a very nebulous, large budget that we identified that savings could be made, that I just haven't got a handle on where that £500,000 would be a big budget, but it might be warranted, and we just don't know. And so I'm just asking, and I think the question has been asked to Mr. Block about that, and we need to see that sooner rather than later. So that's the main point I wanted to make. I'll stick around and listen to your deliberations, because I think it's important that in this year of all years that we do have a very clear budget because of all the pressures and the cost of living crisis that we're under. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Young, for putting that on record. I think it's a very reasonable request, and hopefully in the next few minutes we'll get a better understanding about what that £600,000 is about, because that is a significant sum. Okay, I'm anticipating that this is probably going to be a double-headed effort from Councillor Corey and Councillor King with officer support. I don't know whether you want to just briefly say a few words about the generality of the general fund and in the context of the FF, and then I will open it to the floor. I know that my colleagues in the Conservative group have a number of questions on this specific item. I'm sure others will. But let's just try and keep focus on the general fund at this time and in the context of the MTFF. Over to you for a very brief general introduction.
Thank you, Chair. I'll say a few words, and I think Chris has a bit more detail to give as well. Of course, been managing this whole process for us here at Colchester. So first of all, again, I want to thank the staff. I mean, some of what I wanted to say, I have said in my scrutiny of my portfolio earlier. It's been an immense effort to close this budget because of the budget gaps we've had to face this year, but also to look at the medium-term financial forecast and make sure we can commit and deliver on those savings we've put in and the income generation, and for our Section 151 officer to feel compelled to sign those off. So thank you from the Chief Executive down, all of our staff who have put in the effort to do that. And that does include some staff that will no longer work for this council because of the cuts in personnel that we have had to make. It's a net expenditure of 25 million, but we know there are wider indirect costs as well, and transactions that the council does in terms of benefits, for example, and passing on council tax to the other authorities. We are increasing council tax in line with many other councils to ensure a contribution goes towards the base budget. There is within this budget an element of contribution towards the general fund reserve. So we are able to balance the budget and actually use some surplus to go into the reserves. Bearing in mind over the last few years, we've had to use reserves to smooth. The reason we can do that is because of the Fit for the Future programme, and also discipline when it came to the cost pressure increase of £600,000 roughly that the staff pay increase has added to the budget. We said immediately, and we made it clear to the unions prior to agreeing that deal, that due to those increases, we would have to see other staff reductions and service reductions in order to pay for that. So we have delivered on that to the tune of 558,000 at this point. Again, that is still under scrutiny, but that is helping to close the gap as well. The Fit for the Future programme has been mentioned, and we'll definitely come back to that. In terms of Appendix C, that is where actually more detail, I should have referred to that earlier in terms of answering some of the questions from Councillor Sunnox, because that does give a bit more detail for the Fit for the Future programme and how it breaks down under service headings. It's quite helpful to look at. That is page 71 of this document, and it's Appendix C. And actually that was useful feedback that came from the leaders' alumni budget meeting. And that shows that, again, by spreading it out further under the leadership, Councillor King, making sure that we bring in opposition members, we bring in former leaders, that was a question that was raised, and we've actually written that table to make it clearer where some of the Fit for the Future programme actually does show service reduction, or where we're reducing the service and bringing in a charge, for example. So thank you to officers, thank you to Richard Block for that, putting that table together in response to the leaders' alumni budget. And I do take the point from Councillor Young about the survey. It was a very open survey, so it's about people coming forward and giving points. So I do understand why it was short and sweet. But we also had the in-person briefing where people were here in this very room having really in-depth face-to-face discussions with members of staff. It's a really novel event that I want to see done again through the year. And I know there's a commitment from the leader and the chief executive to do that kind of work. It helped us meet the people in charge of these budgets, and it gave us more detail. So I understand perhaps when doing the online survey, you may not have got as much detail there, but we'll improve on that next time around. At least people are being asked, and we are involving people. I think that's an important aspect of where we are with this budget. And you know why? Because we have to manage together in this really dark time for local government finance. So things have got more transparent, and I thank councillors for their comments earlier and do direct them to Chris to my left here, because he is absolutely championing that and leading on that, and I thank you genuinely, Chris, for that. I will leave it there, Chair, because you wanted me to be short. I'll pass to Chris. I know there'll be lots of detailed questions we'll come back to later, and after Chris, if David wants to.
Yeah, I'll keep this brief, Chair. Councillor Corey has covered most of what I was going to say anyway. I suppose just to sort of really repeat the from a section 5.1 perspective, that we do actually, you know, we would strongly argue that it is a prudent budget, and it's picking up on the reserve point in particular. I must emphasise that this budget actually contributes to, rather than draws upon, the council's reserves. And in terms of the actual preparation of the budget itself, the evolution, if you like, from when we began with initially a £1.446 million deficit back in October, which unfortunately grew a little bit once we got further into the detail. In November, it actually rose to close on 2.4 million, which was the size of the task that was we were faced with, everybody was faced with. Collectively, we managed to eliminate that, and we are before you here this evening in terms of the general fund revenue budget. In terms of the capital programme, that's covered in Appendix B on the revenue side of things. I'm sticking to revenue. That's covered in Appendix B, and I think the only thing I want to say there in terms of the general fund capital programme is it's now actually brought into line with the previous medium-term financial forecast. So capital programmes in the past have been tended to be typically 3 years duration. That's now extended to 5 to give everybody a stronger peak to what things look like, potentially look like, should I say, in years 4 and 5. So that's the key development, I guess, compared to the previous capital programmes that you will have seen. I've got nothing else to add, happy to say.
A couple of minutes from me, Chair, and then we'll get into wherever you want to go. This is a bit of reinforcement, but let's just sort of remind ourselves, if I might, Chair, that we did cover well, I thought, with the help of the Chief Exec's topping off ceremony, why we're doing what we're doing on Fit for the Future. And I think that's just worth a very brief walkthrough. So the strategic intention, and we started this over a year ago, you know, the conversation we've had around garden waste repeated again tonight is a reminder of an awkward difficulty. Who wants to raise money from our residents, he says, careful with my language, mustn't use that T word in front of Martin or anybody else. But nobody wants to do that, but that was the start of this, and the heart of the benefits that are starting to mitigate the budget overruns caused by 20 years of reduction actually in central support to local government, the last couple of years, the imploding of that support, in frankness, abandoning a lot of local government. We were determined across party not to go down that route. We were not going to be issuing Section 114. We were not going to be technically or otherwise bankrupt or broke. We were going to paddle our own canoe and see what help we could get. My instructions on that basis, with the Chief Exec, with the support of everybody, frankly, who cares about the council, which is all of us here, was we would reform how we show where we spend. We'll reform the way in which we have the conversations around what that spend is. We'll be as transparent as possible. We'll be realistic about what we can do and what we can't do, and we'll work to those resultant priorities, which, as discussed tonight, are very clear. We will withdraw from what some things we have done before. We'll aim to be a lot more effective. We'll work with others to ensure we reduce costs where we can. Out of that comes Fit for the Future, from bottom up, but to strategic direction. So, in my view, the absolutely right kind of approach that's cost and benefit and social benefit aware. And I want to say this to Councillor Young, Tim Young, and his colleagues should know this, I hope. We're all, and this is cross-party, in the same place, that the choices we make have to look after the people who are most vulnerable as best we can. That's within the framework of this budget, including the way in which we are going to reinforce those who look after others in our employment inclusion, financial support and employment teams. We've got a good story on that. On communications, that comms team, I'm happy to provide away from this place, Chair, that kind of breakdown that might be useful. But I've just talked to the principal. That comms team is instrumental in a time of change when you're having to sell outwardly and inform and do the same internally to help people go through difficult change across 3 organisations. And a large part of what they do is also devoted to our events, our services and income. But it's a very fair challenge, and if Tim's still here, he still is, I'll ensure that we get to him and his leadership colleagues what they need. I know that will interest the panel, but I just want to give some sort of sense of strategic intention. And it's framed around the fact that this is a 3-year endeavour to get ourselves to where we need to be, which quite simply put, is living within our means. And I ask the panel, when you frame your suggestions and your direction for us, because we'll look at it seriously, we will, that's the whole spirit of this, but you do it in the sense that this is a budget strategy, quite a lot of information about the first year. You spent an hour talking about one key element of it tonight. The rest is going to come in the weeks ahead, and we're going to have an open door approach to how that can be assessed, owned and challenged. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Okay, I'm going to kick things off then. So about 15 years or so ago, when I returned, having lived in London, back home, and got a mortgage here, interest rates were a little bit different then. And so I've been thinking about it quite a lot. Two questions, really. To what extent are we exposed to the risk of dramatic change in interest rates that we don't plan for, because we can't plan for? So I'd like to understand a little bit around the modelling for the risk in that area. And also, there was a time 15, 20 years ago where some investments were made where monies were deposited into banks that weren't so robust. And I just would like some assurance that we're not in that territory ever again. Just some clarity on that would be great. And then I'm going to hand over to Councillor Sunnox for some questions.
Thank you, Darius. I'll answer sort of the high level, and if Chris can come in on the details. So we do assess interest rates. We look at the macroeconomics, and we go out to our external consultants to look specifically at those effects, impacts of interest rates when it comes to our borrowing and our investments. So interestingly, due to some of the review of the capital programme and actually pausing and reducing some of that, there was less capital financing, and instead short-term investments meant we saw an increase of income in terms of interest rates going up in recent times. However, long-term, we've got other borrowing we are looking to do. Short-term has been profitable, but that volatility is not helpful for anyone, because you look at then the knock-on costs to other, in terms of procurement, it will affect us. But actually in the short term, due to our investments, due to our lower levels of borrowing and borrowing rates that we'd already got previously at lower levels, we were not impacted as much. So that's sort of the here and now. However, going forward, we always go out to our external consultants for advice about our investments and our borrowing. And we take those macroeconomic looks at, okay, inflation, how's that going to affect pay, energy cost, etc. Chris, do you want to add anything more specific on
that? No, I've not got much to add. I think I suppose the thing I would say on interest rates, just to add that one of the early advantages, if you like, is shared services, is that we have a different Treasury Management advisors at Epping, and no two experts have got exactly the same view when it comes to interest rate forecasts. There's not a lot of difference, but there's a little bit, and I've introduced at both councils this year a blended forecast, if you like. So we're meeting in the middle. So we've got the middle case scenario of both sets of advisors here. So I think that adds some degree of strength in terms of the forecast. I think that's the first thing I'd say. But also in terms of, you mentioned or covered the issue of the safety of deposits. There is a recommended lending list that is kept up to date on a daily basis, in fact, by our Treasury Management Advisors link. So within our strategy, safety of deposit is the number one priority above and beyond any return on investment. And we simply wouldn't lend to anybody that wasn't on the recommended lending list.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Sonics, I know you have a number of points you wish to raise.
Yes, just bouncing off the interest point. We have the most huge balance sheet on us. We borrow, and I don't know how much we borrow, maybe it's more, but when I was last got a look at it, it was about 132 million. We have, I don't know, somewhere between 40 and 80 million sitting there in investments. And the 132 million is fixed interest for the long term, and the short-term investments are variable interest. So interest rates have gone up recently, and it's our biggest saving has actually been coming from increased interest rates. If you look at the figures, there's no cost centre, there's no department that's saved more than we've done on the interest rates. If we were a bank, the regulator would be after us and asking us about the mismatch on interest rates. I'm being technical now. So, you know, we can have all the Treasury advisors in the world, but the fact is we're taking credit risk we didn't have to take. We are borrowing from the banks and we're lending to the banks. And the one thing, if you go and ask a banker, they do is they make money out of local authorities. I think we need that Treasury management statement that we normally do at this time of year, and that needs to be really done with a fresh set of eyes. It's brilliant we got a new finance team on board, because I think they should get to that. And we need to really think whether we need to be investing so much and borrowing so much. And when I look at the interest rate figures, some of it is explained, but if you look at the HRA interest over the last 4 or 5 years, it's like quadrupled. The interest bill has quadrupled. And if you look at, there's some big, and I think it's intercompany stuff increasing it, there's some big increases within the general fund. So I really think this whole Treasury management statement needs to be done before we can really, and scrutinised before we can really support the budget. So if I can make that my number one question, if I can come back for number two when they've answered.
Yes, I mean, the thing you raised about the Treasury management strategy statement, and you've raised the point about the council carries high levels of investment. That's true. That's historically been the case, but also I'd point out that is reducing now. So we are actually reducing the amount that we've got invested because of the shift in interest rates. So we're running down those investments, if you like, instead of borrowing. So that's already in progress. In terms of the Treasury management strategy, that will come forward, but unfortunately that an updated statement will not be available in time for the budget. But that is because of capacity in the finance team, but that will be along for the scrutiny of the Governance and Audit Committee in March. So, but that doesn't detract from the overall budget, like I emphasise.
Yes, I think we come back to that with the capital programme. If I could move on to the other areas. We've talked a little bit about the engagement with the budget, and I do appreciate the leader's openness and wanting to be open, but I just have to tell him what it's like from the other end of the telescope. We've had very good help from Darren Brown and Chris here on the numbers that they know. But really, to get at the budget figures and to understand where the savings can be made, we need those benchmarking figures that are out in the service areas. I haven't been able to get access to that. The one area where we have had benchmarking figures They're so out of line with the accounts, and I've been asking now for a year why they're so out of line with the accounts. And I think that one of the big things that we need to do to start getting these budgets under control is to start benchmarking every area. We should be able to benchmark housing, waste, leisure, HR, IT, especially IT, against other organisations, not always public sector ones, please. And we should be looking at those, and that will tell us where the big cuts are. We can find 100,000 here and 100,000 there, and maybe there's a little bit of softness in the waste budget this year, as we were discussing earlier. But the big cuts and the big transformations will come from getting that benchmarking stuff. We have not been able, and I understand why, but we've not been able to have access to that. And that's why I don't think we'll be in a position to make a complete opposition budget. We might suggest some amendments. I also wanted to agree 100% with Councillor Young about the survey. I mean, we were given those numbers and people were making fatuous comments, and I don't think, you know, after 10 minutes or something, I refused to take part in it. And I really think my profession has been finance all my life, and I really think that that is popularising it to ad absurdum. And we have to take this much more seriously. The next point is that actually, well, what I'd like to do is to draw people's attention to the MTFF, the Medium-Term Financial Forecast, and try and get everyone to open on the same page. Otherwise, it will be infinitely boring because I'll be spouting numbers wetly. So we need this page in Appendix C, para 3.4. There's a table there.
Okay, just to take our time on this one to get it right. So Appendix C, paragraph 4.
3.4.
3.4, forgive me. Okay.
Is everyone who wants to be with me, and everyone else is Are you there? Yeah. Good, excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to draw in
page 67 for those who care.
I want to draw your attention to a very nice looking figure, 153,000 in the 24-25 column, which is the amount we think we can contribute to reserves. And that is a huge achievement if we could ever do that. I personally believe we haven't got a hope in hell of doing that, and I want to tell you why. We, this year, look as if we're heading for about a 5 million deficit. We've already looked at 3.9 million in the monitoring report. There's another 600,000 of staff savings, and extra pay, to pay 19.25 to each member of staff extra. And there's other adjustments in relation to the companies that I'm fairly sure have to be put through. So the starting point is 5 million. And what I've been saying for a while is that we've got a 5 million deficit. And if we don't do anything about it, it's about 3 years until we're in real trouble. And I've been trying to get my hands around the reserves. This table, more than anything, is what should be telling us what will happen to the reserves. So the first question is, how do we get from minus 5 million to plus 135,000? 153,000. That will be, if we do that, a phenomenal effort. And I've been looking at these figures, I'm taking them apart. I'm a chartered accountant of 40 years experience, and I still can't quite get how we've got there. The next question is around the meaning of these figures and what everyone means by them. What I immediately assumed they were, and Paul Dundas, who's also financially literate, assumed they were, was the cumulative surplus or deficit, and saying we've only got a 2.7 million cumulative surplus or deficit over 5 years, and that's not too bad. Over 5 years, we should be able to find savings to do that. Of course, when you actually look at the figures and contemplate them, that is the cumulative amount of annual savings we will have to make, which is quite a different figure. The cumulative deficit over the 5 years, even according to these figures, which I think are massively optimistic, is about 7.3 million. And we've had interchanges, and Chris has been trying to help us understand why these totals as they are. But I'd beg that in future, we have it completely clear and we say what our deficit is and what it cumulatively will come to. And that brings me to the next thing, which is the most important thing I have to say, is that reserves are our constraint. The constraint on our behaviour is how much, if we got loads of reserves, we're fine, we can continue deficit spending and shuffling the reserves around. I think that the reserves we've got available for deficit spending are very restricted, and we need to get to the bottom of them. They've kindly given us reserve figures up to March 2023, and we need to see those projected reserve figures, and it should be just arithmetic, through to the end of this 5-year period. We need to say, we're making statements about how we're going to finance the housing programme, for example, with 32 million of reserves, of major repairs reserves. We've got all sorts of things going on in those reserves that we can't see. And I personally will never be confident in this budget until we can see a reserve statement. So there's the second big request. We need a Treasury management statement to tell us what's going on with all that interest. And we need a reserve statement to tell us what our constraints are. Without that, we can't really understand the budget or evaluate it. The last point I want to make is that our track record, we've had years, ever since I've been a councillor, not very long, but ever since I've been following the council, we've heard about these various cost-cutting programmes. And the fact is that we simply haven't actually reduced our staff numbers. We've salami sliced back on their pay and so on, but we haven't actually cut the staff numbers. So we should start this Fit for the Future programme with an element of reality. We're not good at this. We haven't done it. And we have to, up our game completely if we're not going to be in trouble in a couple of years' time.
William, you understand things very well, but sometimes saying things like we have not cut staff numbers is incorrect. Okay? The number of headcount is slightly different, I get. And yes, in CCC, we've seen some decreases in the council companies. We've seen an increase, of course, and we've seen some ups and downs in Colchester Borough Homes. But in terms of full-time equivalents, we have seen a reduction. So the statement you've just made is not the case. Okay, so full-time equivalents...
It's on the website. If the website's wrong, then I'm wrong.
Well, I'll have to look back at those numbers. I believe we have reduced over time the full-time equivalents. And what we have also done at the same time is coped with COVID and had more grants in to pay for staff. So in terms of saying that we have not made reductions, that's false. We've taken millions and millions out of the budgets each year. So in terms of headcount, that is different, yes, because we've taken in grants.
Sorry, Councillor Corey, I'm talking about full-time equivalents, and I've looked at the figures. I've got them from the website. If the website's wrong, I'm wrong. I've looked in the council, and I've looked in Colchester Borough Homes, and I've looked at CCHL, I've looked at their accounts, and in all of them, nowhere have we got any substantial cut in numbers. Our track record is that we've been cutting people's pay and not cutting staff numbers, which is what we need to do.
Again, we have not cut people's pay. They have had increases. We've delivered on the living wage. So again, that's not entirely correct.
It's about a 15% real terms pay cut over the last 3 years.
Okay, so there's a difference between saying we've cut people's pay and the difference. Do you understand? It's important for the public to understand.
I do, but it's a real terms cut in pay. I'll correct myself on that.
Right, I'll move on from that, but I'll come back. I'll check on the equivalents, but I'll let David or Chris come in.
I'm going to ask Chris, as I know he's had the conversation with you, but it hasn't been shared here, to talk about the rolling deficits and how we might judge that. So that's one of your, I think, substantial points. And then perhaps I'll pick up your early ones, William, so we don't lose sight of those.
Yeah, I think it's worth picking up on a technical point, just to be clear on on the table on in paragraph 3.4. Now, what that represents is the actual budget deficits across the 5 years, 5-year period of the medium-term financial forecast, and how they add up. I think the important point that the committee should note is that as the council, most people will be aware that the council has a legal obligation to set a balanced budget each year, and that entails eliminating the annual deficits as we go along. So if you take the identified deficit for 25-26, for example, 1.92/2 million there, you'll see in the column to the right of the shaded column. The council will have to eliminate that in order to set a balanced budget for 25-26. At the moment, of course, that's 1 year in the future, and we haven't got a crystal ball at this moment. So therefore, those reductions in the budget can't be taken from the next column. So in terms of setting the budget for 26-27, you would have to remove the 1.2 million there, and that would reveal, as the table says, a 1.3 million pound, 1.31 million pound surplus. So in effect, once you add those up at the column, the columns as we go along in year 5, that represents, call it a cumulative deficit, call it a structural deficit, call it what you will. That's the amount that the council has to take from its base budget, which is £2.8 million. I mean, an alternative way of presenting it would be to add up, add up repeatedly the same deficit. So, for example, the 1.9/2 million pounds. In this instance, you would add it up 4 times, which would probably frighten the horses a little bit. I suspect it would reach a figure of £8 million, which is not what is required to be removed from the base budget. I just want to make that quite clear as a point of assurance to the committee.
Chairman, I really don't understand that. We have a spreadsheet which shows the in-year surplus deficit for each of the coming years. The figures for that don't even add up squarely. And then the next line underneath is cumulative surplus deficit, and what is underneath it is not the cumulative surplus deficit. Now, I'm happy to accept that there may be other issues which come along, and if that is so, they need putting on another line so we really understand what's going on here. But as this table is presented to us, we would just take it at face value that the penultimate line is the in-year surplus deficit, and the line underneath it is the accumulative, which goes up to 7.345 million by the year 2028-29. I mean, the whole point of scrutiny is we need information. We can only scrutinise information. We can't scrutinise hypotheticals, although we'll be asked to do a lot of it this evening. And we just have to accept that when a table like this is given to us, it means what it says. And if there are other caveats, those caveats need to be explained. Otherwise, we can't scrutinise the information properly.
Could I help? And I know Chris feels the same. And I'd refer you, if I might, back to your earlier remarks where you acknowledged, and the panel does, this is a real step up in terms of clarity, which in turn aids the transparency that gives us discussion and debate around real stuff rather than trying to feel our way through it. So I think we have to put this into context. I take the point that this can be misread or misunderstood, and I know that Chris would agree, to send it to each other, that we could add an extra line, we could add an explanatory note, and I think we should do that. So I'd be very happy, we'd be very happy collectively, because the whole point of all this work over many weeks has been to help to have a better cross-party discussion, and we'd be happy to have a look at this, the point that's been made.
Chairman, these are discussions that we're talking about. It's iterative work where we find something's not quite, it doesn't stack up, Chris will give us something. But what we're here to do, Chairman, is to scrutinise these figures and express an opinion to Cabinet about whether we're satisfied with the information that we've been given. And when we have errors like this occurring, where, sorry, take back, it's not an error, where there is a position that the information we're given is not understandable to be scrutinised because there are additional issues missing. I mean, we cannot add value as a scrutiny panel to information presented to us in this way. And we have to have firm data on which we can say, yes, we look at that data, we agree with it, we send a tick up to Cabinet, or we say, no, we don't agree, it doesn't meet the assumptions, or the columns don't add up. And we cannot say as a scrutiny panel that we agree it's a valid budget. And it's just the process which I'm finding difficult, that we're trying to scrutinise something which is a moving feast. And when we look at the fit for purpose stuff, there's no data behind it at all, other than bland statement of what is the intention to save. And we can't say whether the risks are such, whether it's a certainty, whether it's a probability, whether we should recommend to Cabinet that that is a safe way of doing it, because we don't have the data to do that, Chairman. And I just get perplexed that we're not able to carry out a proper scrutiny function if we don't have reliable data on which to carry out that function.
And there is time before the budget to correct anything in which we need more clarity on. I'm going to bring in Councillor Sunnucks very briefly, then the leader, and then I would like to see if anyone else would like to get some airtime. I just think it would be fair to do that. So, Councillor Sunnucks briefly, and then the leader, please. And I know leader, I know you probably want to pick up on benchmarking as well.
Reserves. I would like this scrutiny panel to formally ask that we have a statement of reserves going forward for the budget period that's consistent with the budget forecast. And I think that's a reasonable thing to ask. It's arithmetic, it shouldn't be difficult. It can be caveated with the warnings about the write-offs that we'll have related to the close down of the companies or anything else, but we need to see those reserves. And I personally won't really have any confidence in the budget till we have that.
Councillor Corey,
just on that, we can present that and we can give as much information as possible. I know Chris isn't fully comfortable because of a number of things. One, we still have to have our final accounts in order to get the position that we're starting with to be absolutely clear. Secondly, we, as a political administration, are still making changes, and I'll explain two of them. One is we are looking at putting more in the general fund reserve to say that the prudent level, which previously we've worked at a kind of minimum prudent level around 2 million, we believe due to greater risks in the economy and looking at other councils, we should raise that to, we're thinking 3 million, and look to raise that up over the years. And I see Councillor Willett's nodding because that's a prudent thing to do. So we're looking at those changes. And thirdly, we're also looking at, for example, a contingency fund for this Fit for Future programme, because if we do slip on any of the savings, or if we identify we actually need to invest there with a temporary, with an interim, like Patricia Barry, for example, is an interim position that's actually going to deliver us savings. So we're asking for those items to be changed within the reserve. So we're still sort of nailing those, we're still getting those sorted. So for that reason, Chris feels that we've got to get that sorted to present the full reserve. So that's the accounts, that's second thing I've forgotten now, and the third thing being our contingency amount of the general fund increase. So for those three reasons, are there any other reasons? But otherwise we will try and get something out in a draft form that explains those contingencies. As Councillor Sunnucks said, I mentioned earlier, we may have costs due to the company dormancy and hibernation. So there are other costs that could still impact, and that would be for this year impact, but we would use reserves to do that, therefore declining the reserves slightly.
Okay, Councillor Sunnucks.
You've given the three very good reasons exactly why we need to see those reserves. We absolutely have to see those. So I look forward to seeing them, hopefully before tomorrow's Cabinet meeting when you're approving it. I can't understand how you could approve a budget without looking at that.
We have shared the reserves as they stand, but they will be changing as I've just explained. So we have shared the basic of reserves. I believe we have shared that with you.
Do them subject to your changes. I don't mind caveats, but I need to see what's going on in the reserves. I don't think you can approve the budget till we do see those.
Anything?
Yeah, it's probably, I can't give you specific figures because we haven't finally published the final accounts, as you know, for 22-23, but I am aware of the trajectory, if you like, of the 23-24 budget. And I think one thing I do know, and I've got the figures in front of me here, is the actual reduction in earmarked reserves, usable reserves, this is, between the 31st of March 2022 and the 31st of March 2023. They've gone down by about just under £5 million, which is an interesting coincidence actually with what you just said, because the reason for that is because there was a sizable deficit on the collection fund, which was in the region of about £4.7 million, I think, the Colchester share of the deficit, and that had to be funded, and that was funded 100% by the government through Section 31 grants that the council received during the COVID pandemic, so that was fully financed. So in terms of the actual council's own resources, predominantly they remain intact during 22-23. So I'm happy to look at the 22-23 position and see how we can present that. But I can advise, without quoting numbers, I can advise you from the figures that I've got in front of me here that I can think of there's at least two large reserves in there that are expected to increase during 23-24 as opposed to decrease.
Leader.
Thank you very much, and I welcome the questions and the challenge. I absolutely agree. Leadership in our informal cabinet looked hard at this. It's been an evolving picture, but it's been central to the judgments we've been making. Reserves have to be adequate for the purpose. And Councillor Sunnox, William, you brought to many meetings this, you're going to go over the cliff at 5 million a year and all the rest of it, and we completely get that, which is why we've been planning for months to do what we should do and trying to share it and try to build confidence. And that confidence is made up of many parts. It includes the approach to Fit for the Future, it includes the detail that I set cannot be in full share because it's not fully here yet, of what will be different in terms of services, what will be less, and how will the savings in their detail be made. There's a fair portion of it, in my view, as a budget strategy, but the rest has to come through. And then the third part is, as I say, resilience in reserves, and how we allow, as Mark described, for the realities that you touched on, William, which is, and I have no problem with saying this, because change is difficult, that in the past, look over our shoulder, the promise and the delivery have not always matched. We have to have, and you don't want to hear me going on about it, I'll be sounding like William, about the absolute importance of robust project management, the reality that time and cost run away from even the best of people just about everywhere, and you have to allow for that in your estimates and your contingency. All of that is absolutely in the process of being built in. It's assumptions in part of this stage that's backed by resilient reserves. You need to see that, and we will provide the best we can as fast as we can. I want to see that. I'm aware of it, but I want to see this as something that could be added into the budget papers that go to full council. So I hope we can give you extra assurance. The value of scrutiny is actually in these kind of conversations, and this, if I can say that, it's absolutely your right, and that's your role to tell Cabinet, that's how I see it. Now, hang on a minute, what about this and this and this? And I think I hope this conversation gives you some assurance. We certainly do take some assurance from the exchange and the challenge. But I want to be really clear, if I haven't been, that reserves, that understanding of how we ensure we can deliver, that will be underpinning all that we do. And as we build the picture, remember my earlier remarks, it's entirely legitimate constitutionally to set a framework when a strategy for multi-year change. You have to start the best you have. This is the moment in that cycle of delivery where we're sharing the very best that we have. And then we progressively develop that. It goes through test and challenge and improvement, and it'll be more of the same. If I could park that, as I hope between us we've given you certainly the best we've got at this moment, can I just walk through the other points within you've raised? I think we touched on some of those. Track record, absolutely. I look at staffing, so my understanding is similar to yours, but Mark will be right that underneath the numbers there will be factors that have driven them. But it is a consistent challenge about changing an organisation of a certain size in 3 component parts to something that you can readily see. And the senior team, Richard there, to Darius's right, and we had this conversation yesterday about the importance of us being very clear about numbers, transient and FTE, where they have been, where they are, and where they're going. Now, the work of the coming weeks and months, the next few weeks, the 1st of February, will be a big step towards understanding how reduction will show itself in staff. This is a very sensitive discussion, so I don't want to go too much into that, but we will have to have that clarity in terms of an objective range of the likely effect of changes to be built and then delivered upon the staffing of this council. It won't be the only tracker, but it will be an important tracker of whether we are going in the direction that we need to live within our means and balance our books. I think that I covered all the points, I hope, except the one around benchmarking data. I'm afraid I'm a nerd about this. Dennis and I have had lots of good conversations, and nobody else wants to leave the room when we talk about risk strategies, the balance between what you do and these effects and where it goes. You've got to see some important information. It should be best in class. Well, it should be best in class in terms of the approach, the judgment, the interesting judgment for us should be where we set our sights. We've been, in some respects, a high-performing council. We need to look at all of that when we look at performance and the obligations and promises we make to the public, but it will all be served by good data, the public and private, I have to add, which is how I look at the HRA, for example, over which we've had a weekend exchange with some more information to come to you. I hope that's a help. The intention is absolutely in the same kind of direction as you've been setting.
Okay, I'm just conscious that we've had a lot of airtime here from the Conservatives who are the opposition in this building, so I'm going to look over here and see if colleagues would like to ask any questions at this stage. We're still on the general fund. Happy, content? We keep going? Okay, right, we're still on general fund. Thank you, Leader, for that. Councillor Stokes, do you wish to continue, or can I introduce Councillor Willits? Okay, Councillor Willits, still on the general funds, please.
There are an interesting set of assumptions within the document. Some are in the introductory, others are in the Appendix A. And when one reads assumption of pay awards 3%, and one looks around at what's happening in the economy, I think we have to put a figure in the table, a best guess in the table, because there is no certainty about what's going to happen in the future. But looking at the assumptions as a whole, is any stress testing done on the basket of assumptions to see, would get a feel for the probability that our assumptions are going to come true and the budget is not going to go far off, or seeing a feel for the probability that we could be way off the mark by the time some powerful unions put in claims which cannot be resisted.
Thank you, Dennis. I mean, previously, David and I have tried to have an approach where we have a sort of medium look, a higher end and a lower end. And we do that, and we often do that informally. We have done it sort of publicly before, I think we've shared with you. And we can do that again. When it comes to pay, we constantly have this discussion. We're told by the government inflation is coming down, and then it's slightly picked up again. So it is hard to predict. And again, we do ask our external consultants to give advice on that. But essentially, we have got 3% in the budget, but we're very aware that that again could increase. So that's why I know we've talked about reserves, but we do have a generous amount of reserves. We are there with contingency funds if needs be. But it is about then, like we have done this year, if there is an increase that has not been budgeted for, we need to see where that will be paid out of due to the revenue cost pressure it will create. And we have delivered close to the 600,000 cost this year, and we would have to look at that again. But the Fit for the Future programme has two effects on that. One, it's still agile, so we could make changes within it. Two, when you reduce the overall staff headcount or the staff bill, then the impact of pay rises will also be reduced. But essentially, the principle of your question, yes, we take on board. We will look at sharing that again, David, will we not? Because we like to do that range of assessments. And secondly, as I've said, we've got 3% in the budget, but we're very aware that could change, and we'll be agile within the year to address that and then look at the cumulative effects of that. But you'll understand, of course, publicly as well, we wouldn't want to forecast too high or too low to suggest that that's going to be the pay agreement. That will happen based on negotiations as it comes up.
I fully accept the dangers that you that you highlight there. But the Scrutiny Committee can ask for any information which is available. I mean, we try and do things politely. We don't ask Chris to show us what's actually on his screen for the balances. Although he can see, we can't see it. Scrutiny Committee could say we will see it. So there may be circumstances where perhaps you don't want to show your maximum and minimum. But that doesn't stop us, you sharing it with us so that we can see that the job has been done well, which is what our function in life is. That we look at the predictions, the data, and we say, yes, this is truly fit for purpose. The highs and lows have been looked at, the line down the middle is clearly the expected one. And I think the scrutiny panel would expect that sort of data to be shared with us. If the data exists, why not let us see it? And if you think it's going to cause concern amongst our staff or amongst the taxpayers and so on, we can always do it in private. There's nothing to stop us doing that. But if we want to improve the value out of scrutiny, we do need to see this information so that we can have mature reflection on what we hope will be correct in any case.
I think we'd be happy to do that. We'd look at governance and audit committee as well, depending on which reports and when.
Yep. I do have a question about the Fit for the Future programme, because there we have, other than the intended savings, we have absolutely no information whatsoever. There's just a description of the service and how much will be saved. It was mentioned earlier on that there is work going on in this area. Will we be able to see any supporting data on that before the council meeting? I mean, for instance, take an example, the Holly Trees Museum, a bland figure of £100,000 by introducing charging. I mean, is there any data behind that? Has any market research been done, or just any assumptions made as to what is common sense about what will happen if we introduce charges, sensitivity tests? Do we expect numbers to drop off? It's just really difficult to say, yes, this is a good way forward when we have so little information as a panel about what it really means. And is this another case where there has been some original thought going on between yourselves and the officers, but for some reason you don't want to show it to us at this stage because it's still rudimentary, or is there data that would be helpful for us to say, yes, the Fitness for Future programme is built on solid foundations and it's not just a flyer which has been put in the budget to try and bridge over losses that we hope would never have occurred but are there because of circumstances.
Thank you. It's absolutely not bridging because that would be fooling ourselves, our residents, you. It's absolutely about delivering the reduction in services, the reduction in staff to make it deliverable. So we have to deliver balanced budgets, and we will do, and that's what's planned here over the coming years in terms of only very limited use of reserves for specific purposes, which I can come back to. When it comes to the Fit for Future programme, I believe I'd have to be corrected on the dates and ask the Chief Executive behind me, but we've got the 1st of February and then a March date as well. Do you want to come forward, Pam, and just make that clear? And while Pam just comes forward, if you look at page 71, Appendix C, there is some more detail in that table. And of course, there will be more detail that Pam can talk about when we go through the delivery of this. However, we've given the detail here. And when it comes to the specific example that you put forward, Councillor Winnets, which I thank you for, holly trees, for example, absolutely there has been thinking behind that. So it's accepting that if you do charge, there will be a drop-off of attendees. So we factor that in, and we've done some benchmarking to look at that to go, right, we believe we can get this income in. But absolutely that could fluctuate. It could be that we go over income. So you said about original thought, yes. So there has been quite a bit of preparation behind this, some of which was discussed at that in-person briefing, but there's much more to come. But yes, a lot of thought has gone behind this. This has taken months to develop. It has come from the staff body rather than political cabinet members. We have then socialised it, worked on it, decided what we believe is at most achievable, and we've gone ahead with these numbers, having been revised a number of times, shared beyond just the cabinet. And it's really important that we get the detail coming forward. So I'll pass to Pam about the delivery of this. Thank you.
If I might, just before we do that, if we're looking for solidity again, apart from what's set out in Appendix C, which I think is reasonable for where we're at, it wouldn't be normal for us to provide, a blow-by-blow breakdown of a 20k number or even a 100k number. But the description, I hope, and our sense of purpose, which we try to explain, I hope will give you confidence. But the very first line, the largest element there, 955k, refers back to what we spent at least an hour more on earlier, which built upon earlier test and examination in Scrutiny. In other words, a garden waste charging service. And that passed your challenge, I think, and rightly earned some plaudits for the quality of expectation more than delivered. So I hope that might help the panel be confident with what it's got in front of it.
Thank you, Chair. So with regard to the detail that's in the budget papers, I'll just go back to what I said earlier, that there is sufficient detail in the budget papers to convince the Section 151 officer and his deputy that he can recommend this budget. So I think that's the first thing. Secondly, that doesn't necessarily answer your point about some of the detail. So just to go back to the reference to the amount of work that's already been done, I'd go further than Councillor King in saying that a huge amount of work has been done to prepare the Fit for the Future programme. And the first iteration of that went through to the leadership team in December before Christmas. And further work has resulted as a consequence of that. We'll go back to those dates I mentioned earlier. On the 1st of February, which is next week, of course, the second iteration of that work will go to an informal meeting of Cabinet to leadership team. And that follows in-depth consultation across the senior leadership team and with portfolio holders about the credibility of the proposals. However, the Fit for the Future programme in its almost final form will come to this panel, to the next meeting of scrutiny, which takes place before full council. So I think that gives you some reassurance that no one would be expected to make a decision about the budget at full council without having had sight of a fulsome picture around the proposals and the evidence behind them for our Fit for the Future aspirations. So I hope that helps.
Okay, Councillor Willits.
All my questions on the general budget.
Okay. Anyone else on the general budget? Okay. Let's move on then, please, to the HRA. Okay, who's going to kick us off here? Do I see Councillor Sunnett?
Yes, unless someone wants to give an introduction. I mean, the point about the HRA is that this is our biggest asset by far. And it's sitting in a fund that is managed by Colchester Borough Homes. And all our attention is focused on Colchester Borough Homes. All the governance is focused on Colchester Borough Homes, where the really important things for Colchester Borough Homes, if you look at just that, is the management fees they receive, the staff they pay. They've got a lot of staff, the pension fund liability that they've got, and all sorts of things that are not focused on what's really, really important. I'm talking financially here. The HRA is absolutely huge. And this is the only time, as far as I know, that we actually sort of really get a good look at it. And so we've got here on page Appendix A, section 3.1, we've got a table that I hope everyone is looking at, or actually better still, perhaps I'm just going to shift. Perhaps we better go in the medium-term financial plan. We get a better look at it because it puts the multiple years in. Appendix C, 5.3, which looks roughly like that, with a light blue thing at the top. And first thing to look at is the two figures, 5021 and 7587 in the second column about halfway down the page. It's the Colchester Borough Homes management fee and the supervision and management. Between the two of them, there's about 12.5 million of expenditure there. And that seems an awful lot for managing 5,900 properties. It comes to about 2,100 a property. If you look at housing association accounts, it's about £1,000 a property. If you look at our benchmarking reports, it's 1,300 a property. So I'm completely confused by the benchmarking. But this is what I mean by benchmarking. These are really, really big amounts, and goodness knows what we're doing in that entity, in this HRA, to run up that sort of management cost. But that seems to be a major area to look at. And of course, it doesn't affect the general fund. If we save costs there, we have more to invest in social housing. So it does save, but we seem to, I don't know what we're doing, organising parties, giving away bikes. I haven't a clue what's going on in there to justify those costs. I think that's my biggest single point. The focus and the governance, I feel the council needs to spend an awful lot more time getting underneath what's going on in here. I regard it as one of our biggest areas of activity and really worth a look. When we get onto the capital, there's another important line to look at here. It's the depreciation line, which is put in about 6 million. And that seems to go to a major repairs reserve. Chris is nodding, good. And then the major repairs reserve seems to be somehow recycled into capital expenditure, which all makes sense, except that the properties are depreciating. And so when you look at the accounts, you suddenly see these, the HRA accounts in the annual reports, you suddenly see these big, like £10 million write-downs. So it does come, it sort of goes all the way around the reserves and comes back and hits us in the head when we weren't looking. So there's some really complicated reserve accounting going on here. I guess my key question is around the costs. I've been asking it for a year now. I doubt anyone's got an answer tonight, but it's something that does have to be looked at.
Okay, so there's a legitimate question you said there, because, well, you have suggested that the management costs compared to other housing associations might be higher per unit. I don't know why that is, but that's the suggestion you're making. Richard, did you want to come in on this point?
It was just a take issue with the comment that Councillor Sunnock's made about CBH having parties and giving away bikes, and I just wondered whether he'd like to just withdraw that particular comment.
I'll withdraw that comment, Richard. I'm sorry.
Okay, but the sentiment is that you believe that the management costs per dwelling are higher than what you believe is happening elsewhere. So that's a fair question.
Let me start us off. I mean, this is not a conversation we have in depth here. The view of the organisation, the view of previous tests of colleagues in governments and audit elsewhere of the performance of Colchester Borough Homes against the comparative data, so have to be careful, apples, pears and all the rest of it, was that this was, as they described themselves, relatively against the comparators, private sector and public sector, strong, so in the think of a quadrant, right-hand side, strong on performance and rather lower on costs than their comparators. Now, that may not have had the challenge that changing circles of members might bring today. But I just want us to be very clear, but in terms of past collective judgment, that, tested through scrutiny, governance and audit and other fora, was a collective view. Now, I'm a great fan of challenging the collective view. We know that the circumstances in which the HRA has got to operate are changed by the rules and legislation set by government. That is a worry for us because it influences what we can invest, what returns we get and all the rest of it. Without going to all of that, that is a reason alone for what we've set out to do, and I think this is widely known, which is have an in-depth review of the HRA, all of its financing, and absolutely central to that will be both the quality, which I hope will pass some test, of how we manage a very large and complex estate. That's really important to us here and to those who live there. All the emerging challenges of the day, including condition and the raising of standards of the stock that we have, as well as the aspirations we have to deal with homelessness. Complex picture. That complex picture deserves the intense review in which members will be at the heart, which lies ahead of us. I can't do that tonight, but I absolutely acknowledge, Chair, the point you made. We get it. We're on the case of this, but we would not accept today. It'd be wrong to do it. The assertion, with respect, William, until we've got your and other comparative views and we can put them through the mill and then collectively take a judgment, it is just that assertion. We have an understanding. It absolutely needs challenge for the reasons I've just described, but that's where we're at.
Okay, I'm going to invite the Chief Executive to come up and just make the point myself here that the figures that are before us are the figures that are before us, and we haven't got a comparator to look at to know. And in extension to that, you know, we can see here that maintenance costs are going to go up by about 21%. Now, actually, in light of what's happening in the market with inflation, the cost pressures, global situation, global events, it's kind of legitimate to understand that those costs could be going up. I get that. We can only scrutinise what's in front of us. Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me if I'm repeating some of what Councillor King has said, but I just wanted to add a little bit more detail to the HRA review and to illustrate that this will be led by our Deputy Chief Executive, Lindsay Barker. She's already started to do some preparatory work, but this will give the opportunity that I think you're referring to, Councillor Summits, to have a really deep look, you've mentioned that, Councillor King, at the intricacies of the HRA and the affordability of our housing stock going forward. It won't be a short review, it will be a medium-term review that will look at absolutely every element of our housing situation. I welcome your involvement in that. Secondly, I just wanted to make reference to the point that I think Richard was referring to, and that is the activities of staff within CBH. As you can see, Philip's not here tonight, Philip, the Chief Executive of CBH, but if I hope he won't mind me speaking on his behalf. But I think the staff of CBH during this really deep housing crisis have been under the most incredible pressure. And some of the stories and situations and case studies and challenging cases that they have to deal with are nothing short of heartbreaking. And I think the emotional, as well as the financial pressures on that team, I just think it needs to be put on the record. That's what I'd like to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Willits.
On this very same point, I've been present at G&A committee when Colchester Borough Homes have produced their Boston Square on performance and cost for their 6 key performance indicators and shown just how well they compare with others. But of course, at that stage, we don't have that done alongside the HRA budget as we have this evening. And if there is concern that there is not a direct comparison, and that perhaps some of the organisations that we're comparing with are not a direct comparison with our organisation, we need to feed that back to CBH and ask that perhaps we have a look at their set of slides again and see just what it is that they are presenting to G&A and whether that does in fact map up with the accounts of our HRA and the accounts of other housing associations which are available. So I think it's a very, 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 very simple exercise for someone to just do a sanity check that we are comparing like with like when we look at the performance of key departments in the council.
Thank you. If I may, Chair, I mean, my apologies, I wasn't clear enough. I've reprised, as you recall well as Chair, the kind of test and analysis and the evidence that was provided. That is comparable. The selections are deliberately intended to be such because otherwise, what would be the point? At least the point would be more likely to be lost. My point mainly was with respect to William, his observations around very different numbers. That was my point. I don't know his data sources. I'm not doubting them until I can see them and put my own. Have others have a look at it and have a look at it myself. My point there is we should be very careful about a conclusion before we've had a chance to walk through and compare where the different views come from. That will be part of what the Chief Executive described as a significant, intense and rounded piece of work that looks at all the factors that make up for cost and performance against a changing landscape. Now, this is really important towards the top of a long list of all the things that we have to go and do. I do want to just acknowledge the other point, which is the relationship between conversations in this place at this time and performance. And I think we can always try to make sure that we knit that a bit closer together. But it's not been, for reasons, Dennis, you understand better than many, that's not been particularly an issue. The performance of Colchester Borough Homes has been very well regarded, as well as the positive impacts they have of the work they do as described by the Chief Exec and understood by many of us. But given that we're in a time of challenge and change, I think we'll have to sort of bear in mind the need to make that clearer when we come to this point of budget scrutiny next time.
Okay, Councillor Sonnett.
Yes, I've been asking this question for a year now. I've been promised answers and it's been delayed and delayed and delayed. And what I'm hearing now is it's going to be rolled up with a big piece of work that is not going to be a small piece of work. It's going to be a big piece of work and it's going to go on for a long time. Can I ask that we just focus on that one question and that we get an answer? Just a follow-up thing, do I sense that the HRA is going to become part of the corporate landlord model? Because if it is, that's a very significant thing that I think needs looking at and consideration. I have views on it, not for now.
Yeah, the main answer is no. There'll only be general pieces of asset that we believe we could either dispose of, or there are assets that are undeveloped yet we could look at, but otherwise no. The general stock, no. Just to be clear, what your question, you're saying you keep asking the same question. I think if it's about the comparators, the benchmarking, well then, as Dennis has said, I've seen the data year on year where, and Councillor King has said it, where against comparator authorities and HRA accounts, Colchester Borough Homes do have high performance and low cost. So we can go back and share that. So I think there's a bit of discipline on both sides here. So we can share this information, we can add further appendices in, which will be the information that we have as of the last time that Colchester Borough Homes reported on this, and we can see whether or not we're due an update on that, we can do that. But at the same time, you have to take some of the assumptions that CBH are giving us compared to their benchmarking and what we have in here, compared to, I'm afraid, when you're coming in, Councillor Sunnox, with your suggestions about it. I'm taking the advice from CBH that I get that they report to us, and I'm going to take that as the benchmarking. Okay, I think we have to have some discipline. And I will say the comment where you did talk about parties and whatever else does slightly weaken it when you're bringing in information and then saying that at the same time. So I would say I'll take what CBH are offering, which is the benchmarking. We can put it in here. But again, if you're coming forward with different information and suggesting that these figures are not as good as they should be, I think you have to have some discipline about what are you bringing forward and what are you saying.
I'm very simply saying that I think that the benchmarking we're doing is benchmarking CBH, not CBH and the HRA. You've got to look at the two together. And I suspect that's the reason why the figures are out of line. And when we look at the two together, this is where we get the sort of duplication and the other things. And I'm sorry I talked about parties and bikes. I do take that back because it's a serious point. And it's a point that hasn't been answered for an awful long time. And I feel I'm getting the push off on this one again. So can we please get an answer to that question? It's a straightforward question. The two figures I'm talking about are sitting there right in front of you here. The accounts of housing associations are available. I'll even tell you which ones I've looked at. I've looked at Eastlight, Clarion and Swan. But I'm sure I could look at many more, and you'll find that the range of management costs per dwelling is somewhere between 800 and 1200 per dwelling. And we're up there over 2000. So it's a serious question.
Thank you. We will take that away, serious question, but we also need to compare to comparator local authority in terms of housing, in terms of the housing revenue accounts. But I will take that away. We will compare it. We will look. But in terms of there will be differences that Clarion and Eastlight and Swan can do, that is different to a local authority arm's length management organisation. But we'll take that away. We've all circled it on our papers. We will get an answer, William. It will not be a year. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Corey. Does anyone else wish to dwell on HRA? Are we happy at this stage? Jogging back a bit, and I think I know the answer. I'm very sorry, Councillor Corey, because I realise you're missing your evening appointment by us keeping you here. But I just wonder if we should make another formal recommendation to Cabinet, although I know what the answer is, because Chris has alluded to it, which is that we should consider recommending to Cabinet that they ask for the Treasury management strategy and detail of the reserves. We should put that on record if we are minded here, panel. Cabinet can ignore that advice, but we've heard here from a chartered accountant, 40 years experience, saying he would feel more comfortable about the overall budget here if we had those two pieces of information. I think that's a fair request. Leader?
I just want to be really clear that we're all in the same place on this. This is said that it's good practice to have those key pieces of information available, and preferably at the same time. We are where we are on this. It's been shared, it is available, it's normal practice. So you're pushing at a door, we're in the same place. It's just I don't want the suggestion to be made that somehow we don't want to do it, right? This is information we have, information information in preparation. We're going to share all we can as fast as we can. Thank you.
And it might be, sorry to interrupt, Councillor Corey, but it might be that it's unrealistic for us to expect that request to happen in 24 hours, but actually there is still time before full council. So, with some caveats, that information could be made available.
So yeah, we can share, as I say, the working reserves, draft, caveats, etc. The Treasury management strategy, we can share where it is currently okay? But as Chris said, in terms of getting an update on that, that's a rolling program. We have the strategy in place, and we can share what the forecasts are based on the current figures here, there, and the interest rates up and down the range. We can do that. But I think the question to Councillor Sunnox is, what would be gained in terms of doing that whole process, which we believe is not in our capacity to do a further report? We can attach all the information we currently have. And secondly, it's interesting because we've talked about how actually our Treasury management has delivered for us, okay? It has delivered for us to the point where it has helped our base budget this year, and hopefully will go on to do. And it's interesting that, and you, in particular, Councillor Sunnox, referenced the fact that that has been very useful. So actually it has been good, it has been proven to be good, and therefore actually I think it's a convincing reason to say, okay, we're secure on our finances at this point, and our Treasury management strategy at this point is delivering. Now, of course, I'm not saying we need to review that. We need to review it more and more now because our economy is low and it's unstable. But we will not be able to deliver a whole new Treasury management forecasting statement in the time available. What we can do is tell you what we have been doing, what the strategy is, and where we are now.
Yes, what I'm not hoping for is another long thing by link. What I'm interested in is knowing what the borrowings are and the investments are, what the interest paid is and what the interest received is, and how it's weaving between the HRA and the general fund. And those are all things I suspect that's within our own finance department to be able to do. And as they do it, they'll probably find a few rinky dinks, which I'll understand. I'm not trying to be difficult and not trying to force the pace with link. These are all logical things. I'd much rather have, actually, I think probably what I'm looking for could be on two pieces of A4. Something quite simple, but it's got to be basically telling us about the interest paid, interest received, the amounts we've got lent and the amounts we've got borrowed. Mark, your enthusiasm about our Treasury management is absolutely delightful, because interest rates have gone up and it's helped us. If interest rates go down, we're going to have a budget shortfall, because that's the way we got ourselves set up. So I think we've got to realise that we're with the winds of the market on some of this stuff.
Chris.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, just to pick up on the point in terms of you want to know what the borrowings are, interest paid, received, etc. So that's all embedded in the budget anyway. So that's easy enough to draw out. It just supports the budget. It'll be in there. So with regards to the amounts that we've got invested, clearly we've got all of that, and the amounts we've got borrowed, we've got all of that as well. So that's very easy. That's very different from the Treasury management strategy, a full one that complies with the 2021 code, which is a different beast altogether, and that does take the finance team a lot of work to get there to achieve good practice standards. I've got to be honest, we haven't got the resources to do that in the space of a couple of weeks.
There we are. We have a solution
to that, but I can give you the assurance that you require around balances.
Very good,
etc.
Thank you. That's really positive. Okay, right. Let's draw a line under HRA if we can, and let's look at capex. I'm going to start off, actually. Why not? First of all, obviously, difficult news in this building around the roof, and I note that there is £1 million being set aside for that, which is entirely appropriate and sensible. However, I don't know if that is £1 million to conclude matters, because I haven't seen a QS report or any detail on scheduled works or a quote. No, I'm not saying I should have received that, but I'd like perhaps Leader and Councillor Corey to be mindful that, you know, £1 million doesn't actually go that far when you're talking about a big roof. So I'm just a little bit sensitive about that figure, because we've got to do the work, because we're losing income in the room.
Absolutely. I can assure you we are absolutely on top of that and wanting to push it forward as far as possible. David, as leader, has actually been very keenly close to this, so happy for you to add on. But yes, we are tightening down on the costs, so getting further in depth, and it has to be in depth because otherwise it's a papering over the cracks, quite literally. So we are narrowing down on those costs. So I can ask Councillor King to come in, but I think Richard also. Were you going to add anything?
It'd be nice if it'd be the same, wouldn't it? And hopefully it will. I mean, I think let's keep this at the level we should, which is, this is absolutely not where any of us would want to be. There must be some learning lessons for the future, but the near term, and actually that future is reflecting the fact that we've got a forward maintenance programme, capital, which we should have had before, let's be frank. And we've begged and borrowed as a council and different administrations to manage crisis, let's be frank. And part of the facing up and the realism we have to have includes making sure we've got adequate provision. I don't know what the bill will be, is what I'd simply say. We're at the point of detailed survey, or actually the works to put in scaffolding to get safe access, and then to take the fuller judgment of what has to be done, which will then reflect itself in the pricing that lies ahead. So this is, for me, subject to what Richard wants to add, a prudent initial allocation, and I think we just have to see what the facts are. But this is long, this will be long, slow, and it will be expensive, and the million I personally see as a significant down payment on what lies ahead. It has to be, and Patricia Barry has been referred to, and she is has got a very professional and appropriate approach and the right kind of background for this work. We've had conversations this week, so we're going to have to look at this part of our estate like everything else. What's its future? Members will have a view on this. I know where I stand, Darius. I think being a civic centre in the heart of our city is absolutely important, but this is a huge building, most of it unseen, most of it ill-used, and a lot of it not very good shape. So that whole equation is what lies ahead in terms of the work programme. So this is the kind of the visible top bit, and make a sensible allocation, get work underway as Mark described, but actually the real conversation lies ahead about what comes out of that and how we match, how we take the best judgments as members about the future of this fantastic, fantastic building, alive to its many functions, and the fact that it is, as I say, not in good shape and not well used.
I mean, I think the leader, to be fair, has covered it admirably. Just to also say that Patricia's acutely aware of the need to have wide engagement, both with members and other stakeholders, friends of the Moot Hall organ, etc. We know there's a number of stakeholders we need to involve in this at the correct time. Thanks.
Okay, good. Well, one more then while I'm here, because I do understand maintaining buildings, having owned a couple of houses in my time and having a house now that needs some maintenance, wooden soffits, etc. What I don't understand though is £1 million for IT every year. Can I get some detail behind that? Because I mean, my laptop is 9 years old and it's brilliant. I'd like to understand what £1 million for IT is every year, particularly in the context that we're talking about potentially a reduction in full-time equivalents. We have seen a reduction in full-time equivalents according to some data. So what's £1 million in IT, please?
Yep, wouldn't we all like to know more of that answer? But I can give you as best as I can. So first of all, it's prudent to put that in, because otherwise we'll keep getting sort of large capital amounts come along. But there is a revenue cost as well. The licensing, if you imagine the licenses we have to pay to have our Microsoft and different programs and Capita Pro, all these different programs we use across the council. So half of that comes in licensing, and then the rest is more about capital kit. So that's my sort of overall. I'd have to go back and it's of interest to all of us to find out more on that. So I'll happily take it back. Again, Richard, it looked like you were looking forward to say some more.
Yeah, just to say, I think part of the answer was your point around the kind of, the need to actually transform and change the organisation. But we know from others that big investment in ICT is actually one of the keys that opens the door to that type of change and transformation. And as the portfolio holder for resources has said, having a prudent provision within the budget to allow us to be able to do that is absolutely essential. I think what will be important, again, is member oversight, both from the portfolio holder and Cabinet, in terms of our future IT strategy, and absolutely commit that that will come through the member governance process to give you reassurance before that money's spent.
I'm getting a bit confused on this because most of the serious expenditure on IT is going to be revenue, I would have thought. Gone are the days where we're buying equipment and having a basement full of our own servers. We're now buying cloud services, we're buying Microsoft licenses on an annual basis. And it's revenue budget rather than capital budget, unless we're seriously going to go back to filling the basement with large computers with glowing lights. Looks great, but doesn't really provide a cost-effective solution to many of the ever-changing problems we have, where we don't want to lumber ourselves with kit in the basement. We want a flexible approach, buy the storage on the cloud when it's there, buy the services on the cloud when they're there. So yeah, why is it capital? Why is it not revenue? I fully accept the point that we've got to have the capability to have IT services which underpin digital transformation and offering new services in a better way and a cheaper way. But I don't understand why it's capital.
I'm happy to come in and happy for Chris to follow. Again, happy to take it away and get more detail, but it is about investing in programs to make sure we can do, there's a particular word about shift in the papers, channel shift, to invest in those programs, and those licenses does cost money. So actually being prudent to say we're having that in there, I think is right. So we're investing hopefully to save by going over into more digital, more apps, etc., ways of working. I do understand your point about revenue and capital, though. I don't know if Chris can help that, but we'll go back and get more information. But sometimes it is best to say, right, capital is going in there, so that instead of having reoccurring revenue, we can say we're definitely paying for this piece of kit in these years, etc. I feel it works well prudently, but I can take it away.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question that you raised, Councillor Willits. I'm not a capital expert. I have somebody in my team who I consult on an almost daily basis around technical questions of this nature. But this is capitalisable expenditure, for want of a better phrase, that's going into the budget. But I think the revenue point you make is a good one, because in terms of the way the MRP charges work, they're based on asset lives, and in the case of IT, I'm sure everybody can appreciate they have a very short life. So basically everything is charged, typically everything is charged over about 7 years or so. So for every £1 million you invest, 1/7 of that will be incurred as a revenue cost in the year. So it is the next best thing to revenue, you could say.
Councillor Willits.
Chairman, I have a further question on page 54, 2.2, the one-off capital investments. Keeping abreast of things as they go, the reports that go through, apart from the Moot Hall, the only other one where there was virtually no information available was in fact the largest item on the list, the £7.7 million for the enabling infrastructure. Now, I know there have been some very persuasive arguments put forward as to why we need to include that, because something to do with hiring out the A12 to make adjustments to the carriageway and so on. But given the size of that project, I would have felt more confident if there had been an outline business case or project description, which tells us we're thinking about opening up access to a key employment site. And I don't really know this 7.7 million is going to do. I know there was a planning permission which said that we got to do some work, but there is sort of no information which says that this money is going, this capital investment is going to be aligned to the requirements in the planning permission. I just feel that there's an inadequate amount of knowledge about this project to justify putting £7.7 million in the account this year, other than satisfying National Highways that we have the wherewithal to do a project if they allocate us the time.
Leader will probably come in on this one, because also it's worth pointing out that you are the county council member as well for this patch, aren't you?
Let's not talk about highways, other than in glowing terms. Right. In all seriousness, the quality of the relationship between the City Council and the County Council, as expressed through Team Colchester, and the fact that the relationships that make that happen at officer and senior member level is absolutely where we want it to be, and I that's already shown, has already proved fruitful, and I think has huge prospects. I mean, that's alongside this, but this is covered by item 8.1 of the Cabinet Papers for tomorrow. But I absolutely, Councillor Willetts-Dennis, absolutely accept they would have been helpful, had a cross-reference or a brief summation. But there is a very good paper, in my view, a very good paper, quite a lengthy one as well, that reminds us of what you actually touched on, that history, relationship to the planning permission, that it's been long understood that development of the junction would have to take place, and that is a controlled process, which the county and our people have a guided conversation to come to conclusion, and the paper describes the fact that there's enough maturity there that to give us confidence that that's an appropriate allocation. It's the very best assessment that's available this time, but the future of the project, I don't want to go into that now, that's not really the subject for now, but there is enough depth and detail there, I think, to give you assurance that this is a thoughtful estimate based upon the best information that we have at this time, in working with our own planners. And this is work led by the Deputy Chief Executive, and she has, in my view, as the paper will show you, a very good grip and a very good reminder for all of us what we're about, the potential for that site, and why this work has to happen.
I have no qualms with that at all. I'm sure that everything that has been said is absolutely spot on. The issue is, this is the scrutiny panel. We're being asked to scrutinise whether this is a sensible and realistic approach to the one-off schemes for the new capital investment for the year, and we have absolutely nothing that gives us any details about it, other than the high-level statement that has just been made. Whereas with the rest of the projects, apart from the Moot Hall, we know what the schemes are, where they are, what they're going to achieve, what they're going to involve. And given the scale of this investment, 7.7, I would have thought that the panel would have had and been entitled to see the information that you're talking about. You know, I don't doubt that it's been looked at and scrutinised by the officers. The issue is whether it's been scrutinised by the scrutiny panel, which it hasn't. So we really have no basis to say that it's a wise investment. You may have, but the scrutiny panel doesn't. And that's the issue which we've been sort of falling over on several occasions this evening.
Could I just point out that this has gone through before both Cabinet and Governance and Audit. So this is a refresh of an understanding that's long been in place based upon the plan. I'm not disagreeing with your point that it would have been a richer paper to have had more of that understanding captured right here, given its significance of the sum. But I also just gently say this has been through all due process several times, and then we've had a pause. And what we've done is say there is now enough knowledge of what's long been known to make a prudent allocation. After all, that's all this is. I mean, that's really important. It's a prudent allocation, proper process will apply before we actually get to the point of committing sums of money. But this is the right thing to do. There's a choice. We could wait. But the right thing to do, we thought, was to share what we know, even though there's steps ahead. But I gently say, as I've said, that there is process behind us, both in what we're going to do, the planning, the intent, and going through governance and audit in the past, early 23, I think it was.
Councillor Sonics.
Yes, I want to 100% back up what Councillor Willits has said. I have read the paper for tomorrow. I've read everything else I can get my hands on about it. And we need to know what the 7.7 million, I think it's being approved tomorrow. I think I'm right in saying it's being approved tomorrow. So, as a precursor for tomorrow, we need to know what we're doing. We need to know which bit of enabling works we're doing, which bit of road is being built, which roundabout is being converted to traffic lights. And then more than that, we need some numbers around why it's justified. And most importantly of all, why we are the people to do it. This seems to be a developer's job. And we should, I feel that we're just throwing more and more money after these, this Northern Gateway project. I don't want to go any further tonight, but just to say that I'll be seriously questioning this expenditure tomorrow if I manage to have my say tomorrow evening.
I've always known you to have your say, William, but I do refer you, that as a council, we agreed to set off down this course. So this is about a refresh for me on where we already were, sharing the best and best and most recent information that we have to hand.
If I can go on to the other points about, and I guess that's the general point, which is the lack of appraisal supporting the capital programme, even after we've been having a piece of work going on for a year on it. Can I draw attention to the table? I've lost it myself now. There we are. Appendix B, the last page of Appendix B, this table here. And I've just got a couple of questions. And the first one, probably I'm wrong because it's before my time. Town deal, I always thought was 18 or 20 million quid that we had to spend on that. And we only seem to have 4.5 million in this. So what's happened to the other bits? Are we going to lose that money? Or are we going to lose that grant money? And then the other question I have is about the borrowing. 25.7 million of extra borrowing. Are we planning, have we done any more borrowing in the last year? I think it was 132 million that we had at the beginning of last balance sheet I saw. Have we done any more borrowing in the last year? And are we planning to go to the market? When are we going to the market to borrow more money?
Sorry, if you allow me just to address that at the second point. Basically, that will come out in the borrowing and analysis that I promised there. So any borrowing that we've taken out, any that we've repaid will be reflected in that analysis.
And the Heart of Greenstead, what's happened there? Only 4.5 million. I see Councillor Young's gone. I'm sure he would be hopping up and down if he thought his project had disappeared. Or perhaps it's in the list, I haven't seen it.
It may be. I'm not well cited. If I'm honest, I'm not well cited about the relationship between that and this, but I can absolutely say, you'll know there's independent oversight, but we're the accounting body. We've not lost any of it. And we still have it. And the plans as published are still being followed through, but perhaps we might follow up with just being, give the panel assurance about where it might be seen, if that would be helpful.
Sorry, William, could you just help me there? What were you questioning, say the Greenstead example? Could you just point out where you were looking there, please? Right.
Sorry, I thought it was a whole lot more than that. I was expecting to see 18 million or something in that figure there.
I think that's the total, or a subtotal. There is a 30 million that includes the 7.7
and the 18.5, which is the levelling up fund stuff. So the levelling up fund looks about right. The town deal looks as if it's lost its legs somewhere. I wonder perhaps it's been cut out in the capital programme review. No.
No, I mean...
The dialogue is on page 60, the second paragraph down, grants, where it says, secondly, town deal fund, 4.2 million for the town centre and the university cycle park, etc., etc. And there's another reference somewhere which talks about the 6 million from Homes for England, actually funding the Heart of Grinstead project, not in our capital programme, which wasn't, as I understood it.
Sorry, just to sort of pick up on this without diving into too much detail, that table there represents what we currently have in 24-25 and what we have in the planned budgets for, sorry, not currently in for 20, slip of the tongue, I do apologise. It represents what we plan to spend for 24-25 through to 28-29. What it doesn't cover is earlier years, and for that reason, you'll see the panel on the right there, scheme history. You'll see much larger numbers. It will tell you how much has gone into that scheme in total over the total approved budget. So the figures will be larger where schemes have been going on for a number of years. This is a forward-looking document.
There's only a few $100,000 that's actually been spent to date. Are you saying that total approved budget is in addition to what we've got here?
No, the total approved budget reflects the total approved budget, and that includes earlier years as well. So, but I'm happy to take back specific questions about specific schemes. I don't have the answers on a scheme by scheme basis off the top of my head.
I've only got one big question on the HRA, which is how on earth it's going to work, and I'm going to try and find the table, which is showing that over the next 5 years, we're spending 205 million, which is going to be financed by major repairs reserve, which is depreciation, which I sort of get, 32 million. Revenue contributions 15 million, which I sort of get. Grants 6 million, 15 million right to buy receipts, I get that, and then 135 million of borrowing. And I just can't see how even the longest piece of work can tell us that borrowing 135 million at current interest rates, maybe 4.5%, investing it in social housing at 1%, that's 3.5% a year of deficit that we're going to have. How on earth is that going to work? 3.5% of 135 million, someone better at arithmetic, I don't know, it's 3, 4, 5 million, something like that figure, is absolutely going to wipe out our savings and give us a massively harder task to make things balance. And I've seen the appraisal methodology that we approved the other day, or they approved, I didn't approve it, I opposed it, for the HRA spending. And the assumptions there, the discount rate, 3.5% when interest rates are 4%. The inflationary increases in rent, I think were, I forget what it was, 3%, and inflationary increases in costs 2.5%. When you're looking at long projects, those come out as wildly, if you look actually at the last year of those projects, it's so unbelievably unrealistic that I think we are a little bit head in the sand about how to finance all this social housing, and this is very overambitious and shouldn't be approved.
Sorry, just to pick up on this point, sorry to go back to the discussion around the review of the HRA. One of the key outcomes from that will be a refreshed 30-year business plan, and that will cover all of this. So it will demonstrate the affordability or otherwise of proposals here, the long-term proposals that are presented here, so it could well change is the simple answer to that. One thing is for certain, that's what the model is designed to do. It will draw out exactly the points you're making.
If it's anything like the appraisal model, it'll be a dream. And I would rarely question whether we can afford this type of investment and whether we shouldn't be thinking smarter about how we manage our existing portfolio and looking at alternative ways. And my group's come up with various proposals about almshouses and other things. We should be thinking of this in a different way. This just doesn't look remotely viable to me as it is. And however long the piece of work and however many people you involve and however many stakeholders you consult, it won't change the arithmetic.
I'll just come back and say that as resources portfolio holder years ago and leader and resources portfolio holder now, I have had to assess the HRA account and the long-term borrowing, and we have seen changes in terms of the government's policy to do rent reduction, which actually saw us having to absolutely reprofile what we were doing. So I can assure you that over those years, say 7 or 8 years, we have managed it well, and in actually more turbulent times. We have turbulent times in terms of the housing crisis and provision of it. But I have confidence in our figures. We will be reviewing it in the way that we have explained earlier, but I do have confidence in our figures at the moment. And the change due to what Councillor Smith has put forward with affordable rents as well will make our properties that we acquire going forward deliver back greater viability as well. It's only a small part, but that helps us into the future. So that's the best I can say for now, but based on the fact we've had to go over a roller coaster in terms of the housing revenue account, we've managed it before and have had to scale back and pare down before, and if we have to do that again, we will.
Thank you. It's been I think this review is urgently needed and shouldn't be allowed to take too long. It's been a while since interest rates increased, and it's the consequences of that we have to get our head round.
Yeah, I won't blame the politics there for the high interest rates, but we know what happened.
Okay, it is coming up to 10 to 10, so we do need to for the sake of everyone and the hall keepers, crack on. Councillor Sunnox.
I've got one final point. In the capital programme, we've got Vineyard Street and Britannia car park included, but the income the loss of income has not been recognised in the MTFF. So I either feel we need to take Britannia and Vineyard Street out of the capital programme or put the loss of revenue in to the budget numbers.
Thank you for that. That's a good question, something we have been looking at. I'd have to go back and get more detail, but the high level answer is that we've remodelled. If we take away those car parks, where will they go? And we believe they will go into some of our car parks nearby. So it's about remodelling that, looking at the car parking strategy. We have an award-winning officer in terms of Richard, who runs that. So we'll go back and get that data and get the basis of our assumptions on that, but we assume we will take most of that into our other car parks. But Leader?
I have seen some of that. It's being reviewed now. The modelling suggests minimal impacts. We have a long conversation about modelling, the fact that we've got a good past track record on this, and they're also looking at other contributory sites in terms of parking as well. So you have to look at this in terms of the whole parking strategy, which looks at things that come in and out. But some of this is some years away, which has been out in the public domain as well. So
Leader, this was touched upon on local plan as well, in a public forum as well, that there are potential other sites that might generate income for car parking.
One tiny point as well is business rates. We get charged on business rates on car parks that most of the public will not understand that fact also comes in. So actually we will have a loss of income, but actually gain in terms of not paying out certain amounts of business rates as well. So that's partly why it becomes fairly negligible. But again, we can go back and check because it is a question. It's a question the public want to understand. As we say, remodelling, we should get most of that car usage into our other car parks, but we can take that away for further.
Can I just say that this came up from the Middlewick people, sent it to me. They sent me photographs of queues outside one of those car parks before Christmas, and the constraints around St Botolph's roundabout and so on. And I feel it's, we've put it in the capital programme for this coming year, okay? So that income's going to disappear really quickly.
Let me repeat again, no loss, no material loss is the current view on income. And in terms of the modelling and what they see in terms of usage, I can only go by what we see and what we hear, which is there are some peak times around Christmas when you will have a queue to a car park. Richard Walker's advice, well, understanding is that typically that's a matter of minutes, as much as half an hour. In the round, a lot of our capacity is not used. That's just the way these things are. And that's how we have to look at this. You have to have enough capacity to meet the great majority of needs, serve the whole of the city. You have to accept the really exceptional circumstances are just that.
Okay. Well, I mean, we're coming to a point where we've just been teased about the prospect of some exciting work coming before us in the future about car parking, which is something we're all very much looking forward to seeing. So I'm thinking we need to draw it to an end tonight. Clark, Owen, can I just, for the benefit of my mental capacity, just check in on what we've recommended tonight? Because I counted 3 areas in my head. We're going to ask Cabinet to get some clarity around the assets and what happens to those within the dormant companies. And then I made the point that the TMS and the reserves information should be requested by Cabinet, and we've had an indication that can just about be done to satisfy the concerns that Councillor Sunnox has and recognise the capacity limitations within our finance team. Is that what you got down? Is there anything else there?
An amended
the
TFF, amended to MTFF with the correct totals.
It's not
The
about
totals
correct.
are correct, just to be clear.
A supplementary note and an extra line is what we were talking about here.
And it was, sorry, I misspoke. It's the reserves. You wanted a slight caveated draft version of those as well.
Okay. Have we missed anything else? Is everyone happy? We draw this to a wrap?
Chairman, going back to the earlier point about, what are we doing in terms of scrutiny? What are we able to do in fast-moving programmes? My opinion is that as a panel, we have asked all the right questions to try and convince ourselves that this is a sound budget. We've identified some areas where we do need further information. But other than those areas, I have reasonable confidence that what we've been told this evening tells a good story for the budget, that it is a sort of a budget which can go forward with a degree of support, not 100% support from us, because we've identified that we just don't have the information to say this is 100% approved. But what we've heard has, in the main, given us confidence as a panel that this is a budget which is fit for purpose.
I'd just like to record that I disagree with that.
Okay. I'm going to conclude the meeting. Thank you very much for your time, everyone.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, was that what Councillor Willett said? Was that a comment for Cabinet or Cabinet just for tonight?
It was a comment for tonight. You tried to be so positive.